Joshua Powell was born on January 20, 1976, in Puyallup, Washington, to Steven and Terrica Powell. He had 4 siblings: Michael, John, Jennifer, and Alina. However, life in the Powell family was far from normal. Their father, Steven, was controlling and inappropriate, fostering a toxic atmosphere for his children. He shared adult material with his sons and set no boundaries, exposing them to adult content that influenced their behavior. As a teenager, Joshua acted out violently. He once killed his sister's pet gerbil in a fit of anger. He also threatened his mother with a knife during an argument, and when he felt desperate, he threatened to harm himself. In 2000, Joshua met Susan Cox at a church dinner. She was kind, hardworking, and full of life, and they got married within a year. Unbeknownst to Susan, her marriage would encounter serious challenges. Initially, they lived with Joshua's father, Steven, in Washington, and that was when things became really disturbing. Steven began to obsess over Susan. He watched her with a camera, used a small mirror to look into the bathroom, stole her underwear from the washing machine, read her diary, and posted love songs online under a pseudonym. Finally, one day, he confessed his feelings to Susan. This conversation, which included Susan's panicked rejection, was accidentally recorded on his own camera. It became the final straw. Joshua and Susan decided to pack up and move to Utah, hoping to forget about Steven. For a while, life seemed to stabilize for Joshua and Susan, who had 2 sons named Charlie and Braden. They relocated to West Valley City, Utah, in search of a fresh start. However, Susan felt increasingly suffocated in her marriage. Her friends noticed her unhappiness and learned that Joshua hardly showed her any affection, creating a sense of distance between them. By the summer of 2008, their situation had deteriorated significantly. Joshua and Susan argued constantly, even in front of their children. Joshua had become extremely controlling, making all the decisions and leaving Susan feeling trapped. Their marriage was not just struggling, it was falling apart. He took complete control of their finances, forcing Susan to rely on him for even minor expenses. He reduced their grocery budget, refused to buy her new clothes, and required her to justify every dollar she spent. While he guarded their bank accounts, he had no issue spending money on himself, wasting thousands while Susan struggled to afford basic necessities. The issue extended to their vehicles as well. Although they owned 2 cars, Joshua claimed the family car as his own. Instead of allowing Susan to drive to work, he made her ride a bike, regardless of the weather or her fatigue. Moreover, he started to distance himself from their shared faith. Although they had been active members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Joshua began refusing to attend services with Susan and their sons. He mocked her beliefs, made excuses to avoid church, and discouraged her involvement. The most painful betrayal came when Joshua refused to sever ties with his father, Steven, despite Susan's insistence that he was dangerous and unwelcome in their lives. Joshua ignored her concerns, continued to communicate with his father, and allowed their young children to maintain contact with him. By 2007, Joshua had accumulated over $200,000 in debt, adding to their marital strain as Susan recognized that their situation was worsening. In response, she began documenting everything. In 2008, Susan created a video documenting the damage in her home, which she attributed to Joshua. That same year, she wrote a secret will ominously stating that if she were to die, it might not be an accident, even if it appeared to be one. Just a year later, she disappeared without a trace. On December 6, 2009, everything seemed normal. That morning, Susan, Charlie, and Braden went to church as usual. Susan interacted with friends and tended to her boys, and nothing appeared out of the ordinary. After church, a neighbor visited the family and spent some time with them before leaving. No one could have predicted that this would be the last time anyone would see Susan. The following morning, December 7th, something felt off. Susan didn't show up for work and hadn't called in sick or requested a day off. At the same time, the boys' nanny noticed that Joshua hadn't dropped them off, which was unusual for him. Concerned, she tried to contact the family, but no one answered. As hours went by without any word from Susan or Joshua, worry turned to fear. Joshua's mother, Terrica, and his sister, Jennifer, learned about the situation and rushed to the house. When they arrived, they found the doors locked, the curtains drawn, and no one inside. The unsettling silence heightened their anxiety. They knocked and called out, but received no response. In a state of panic, they called the police. Officers arrived and forced entry into the home, fearing that the family might have been victims of carbon monoxide poisoning or faced another emergency. What the officers discovered inside the house was deeply concerning. Although the house was empty, something felt wrong. Susan's purse, wallet, and identification were still there, untouched. Her cell phone was later found in the family's only car, a Chrysler Town & Country minivan that Joshua had been using. It was turned off. There were no signs of a struggle, but one detail stood out. 2 box fans were set up in the living room, blowing air directly onto a damp spot on the couch. This unusual detail felt unsettling. Hours later, around 5 p.m., Joshua returned home with his sons, Charlie and Braden. The police quickly brought him in for questioning. His explanation was strange. He claimed that after midnight on December 7th, he took his 2 young sons, ages 4 and 2, on a spontaneous camping trip to the Pony Express Trail in western Utah, a remote area characterized by snow and freezing temperatures. He mentioned that Susan stayed home to sleep. His story raised many questions. Who would take toddlers on an impromptu camping trip in sub-freezing weather in the middle of the night, especially when they had work and daycare to prepare for in just a few hours? Police found it suspicious that Joshua had not notified his boss about not coming to work that day. When asked why, he gave a puzzling answer. He claimed he had lost track of the days and thought it was Sunday instead of Monday. Investigators aimed to confirm his story by sending a team to the area where he claimed to have camped. However, they found no evidence to support his claim: no tire tracks in the snow, no footprints, no fire pit, nothing. It was as if he had never gone on that trip. Things took an even stranger turn. On December 8th, after a second police interview, Joshua suddenly rented a car from Salt Lake City International Airport and then disappeared for nearly 18 hours. His whereabouts during that time remain unknown. When he finally reappeared, he called his mother from Interstate 84 in Tremonton, Utah, sounding disoriented and giving vague answers about his location. Later, he told his sister Jennifer that he had been driving around the city aimlessly, randomly getting on and off different freeways. When police examined the rental car, they found that he had added 87 miles to the odometer. Where did he go? What was he doing? No one knows, but it was becoming increasingly evident that Joshua was concealing something. 2 days after Susan went missing, the police conducted another search of her home. This time, they found something concerning on the floor: traces of Susan's blood. While it wasn't a large amount, it was enough to raise serious questions. Inside the house, they also discovered life insurance policies totaling $1.5 million and a handwritten letter from Susan. In the letter, she expressed her growing fear for her life and mentioned being terrified of Joshua. Years later, DNA tests confirmed that one blood sample belonged to Susan, while another matched an unknown male, whose identity remains unknown. As the police investigated Joshua's actions following Susan's disappearance, his behavior appeared increasingly suspicious. He emptied her retirement accounts, canceled her chiropractic appointments, and withdrew his sons from daycare, all within days of her vanishing. It seemed he was trying to erase her from their lives. Additionally, Joshua had previously talked to co-workers about how to dispose of a body in an abandoned mine shaft. At the time, people dismissed it as a strange comment, but now, it seemed more significant. As investigators worked to understand what happened to Susan, they questioned the only other witnesses present with Joshua that night: his sons. 4-year-old Charlie was interviewed, and surprisingly, he confirmed that the camping trip took place. However, his account included a significant twist. He claimed that their mother was with them. According to Charlie, Susan was in the car that night but never returned home. Weeks later, a teacher overheard Charlie make a chilling remark, stating that his mother was dead, without any details or explanations, suggesting he had come to accept this reality. Additionally, Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, reported a troubling incident. At daycare, Charlie's younger brother, Braden, drew a picture of a van. When asked about it, Braden pointed to the back of the van and said, "Mommy was in the trunk." This raised further suspicions for the police, who were becoming increasingly convinced that Joshua was aware of what had happened to Susan. They intended to bring Joshua in for further questioning and requested all footage of his interviews with local news outlets. However, Joshua showed no willingness to cooperate. On December 14th, he obtained legal representation. In the following days, he became more distant and less responsive to the authorities. Just before Christmas, he gathered his sons and left Utah, returning to Puyallup, Washington, to live with his father, Steven Powell. By December 24th, police identified him as a person of interest in the case. Sadly, the situation was far from resolved. In 2010, Joshua moved into his father's house in Puyallup, bringing his two young sons, Charlie and Braden. Joshua made it clear he wasn't returning to Utah, announcing plans to rent out their home in West Valley City. Some reports indicated he left due to losing his job, but those who knew him felt he was fleeing from something. Shortly after settling in Washington, a website called SusanPowell.org emerged. It claimed to be the official site for Susan Powell, but instead of helping to find her, it focused on defending Joshua. The site accused Susan's family, including her sister Jennifer Graves, and even the LDS Church of conducting a smear campaign against him. Some posts went so far as to suggest that Susan had fled to Brazil with another missing person, journalist Stephen Kocher, a completely unfounded theory. It didn't take long for people to suspect that Joshua and his father, Steven, were behind the website. Then, by late 2010, the Powells made a startling claim. They suggested that Susan had been mentally ill and had intentionally abandoned her family. This seemed like a desperate attempt to change the narrative, but Susan's parents quickly rebutted it. There was no evidence to support the idea that Susan left on her own or that she was mentally unstable. While Joshua tried to portray himself as the victim, the police began focusing on his father, Steven. A family friend revealed that Steven had been obsessed with Susan for years. When investigators examined Steven's computers, they discovered 4,500 images of Susan, many taken without her consent. These were not just ordinary photographs, they included disturbing close-ups of her body. Police began investigating Joshua's brother, Michael Powell, after he displayed suspicious behavior. Shortly after Susan went missing, he sold his broken Ford Taurus to a junkyard in Pendleton, Oregon. This raised eyebrows, especially when he later requested satellite images of the lot, seemingly to monitor the car. When authorities tracked it down, they used cadaver dogs, which indicated that human remains had once been in the trunk. Unfortunately, DNA tests did not yield conclusive results, leaving a key question in the case unanswered. In September 2011, police thought they had a significant lead. While searching Topaz Mountain in Utah, a location frequently visited by Joshua, they discovered what looked like a grave site. The ground appeared to have been recently disturbed and showed signs of digging. Investigators spent several days examining the area, but ultimately found no remains. Meanwhile, tensions between the Joshua families and the Susan families escalated. After police searched Steven's home, both he and Joshua took to the media to advocate for their side of the story. Steven claimed that he and Susan were developing a romantic relationship before her disappearance, using old journal entries from her teenage years to argue that she had always been unstable. A judge did not accept this narrative. He ruled that Steven and Joshua could not publish any of Susan's personal writings and ordered them to return or destroy any journals they had already made public. Then the situation escalated. On September 22nd, the police arrested Steven on charges of voyeurism and child abuse. Investigators found secretly recorded videos in his home featuring young girls, adult women, and, most alarmingly, Susan. It was apparent that Steven posed a serious danger, and authorities began to suspect that Joshua might not be innocent either. John Long, Washington's Assistant Attorney General, announced that Joshua was now part of the investigation. The day after Steven's arrest, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, filed for custody of his grandchildren, Charlie and Braden. Initially, the court granted him only temporary custody, allowing Joshua the opportunity to regain custody if he moved out of Steven's home. Joshua rented a house in South Hill, Washington, presenting it as if he were complying with the order. However, authorities later claimed he never actually lived there. By this time, Joshua's sister, Jennifer, publicly expressed her belief that he was involved in Susan's disappearance. As the custody battle escalated, the court ordered Joshua to undergo psychological evaluations. A forensic psychologist, James Manley, evaluated Joshua and discovered concerning patterns. Joshua denied having any normal human flaws or weaknesses and displayed highly controlling behavior toward his sons. He also exhibited signs of deep paranoia, frequently blaming the police and media for his difficulties. Despite these findings, there was no direct evidence of abuse. Therefore, Manley allowed Joshua to visit his sons several times a week under the supervision of a social worker. However, in January 2012, everything changed. When examining computers seized from Joshua's home, police found about 400 images of child abuse, bestiality, and incest. The images had been cached from a previous owner, but Joshua had viewed them. Although they weren't illegal, the psychologist handling his case was deeply concerned. Joshua was ordered to undergo a full psychological evaluation and a polygraph test. As the pressure mounts, Joshua becomes desperate and is about to commit a horrific act that no one could have imagined. On February 5, 2012, social worker Elizabeth Griffin Hall pulled up to Joshua's house in South Hill, Washington, for what was supposed to be a routine supervised visit between him and his two young boys, Charlie and Braden. The court had ordered these visits to be monitored for the children's safety, so Hall was there to ensure everything went smoothly. However, the moment she arrived, something felt off. As soon as the boys reached the front door, Joshua yanked them inside and slammed it shut right in Hall's face. She barely had time to react before she heard the deadbolt click. She pounded on the door, shouting for him to open it, but he didn't respond. Panicked, she pulled out her phone and called 911. Her voice shook as she told the dispatcher what had just happened, that she was supposed to be supervising the visit, that Joshua had locked her out, and that she feared for the boys' safety. She begged them to send help quickly. Immediately afterwards, a terrible explosion occurred, shaking the house. The force of the explosion propelled Hall backward. Within seconds, flames erupted, engulfing the home in thick black smoke. The intense heat scorched the air around her, leaving her immobilized by fear. Neighbors rushed over, some shouting and others already calling emergency services, but it was too late. The fire spread rapidly, and there was no chance for anyone inside to escape alive. Investigators later confirmed their initial suspicions. Joshua had planned this act. It wasn't an accident or a tragic gas leak. He had doused the house in gasoline, turning it into a death trap. Officially, Charlie and Braden died from carbon monoxide poisoning, but the reality was more horrific. Joshua had attacked them with a hatchet before starting the fire. The day before the tragedy, he emptied his bank account, donated the boys' toys to charity, and sent cold, emotionless goodbye emails to family and friends. Charlie and Braden were buried beside their mother, whom they would never see again, but their family's struggle continued. A year after Joshua took the lives of his two young sons and himself, his brother Michael tragically followed suit. On February 11, 2013, he ended his own life. His ending his own life sparked even more suspicion. In 2012, police questioned him several times about his abandoned Ford Taurus, which was found at a wrecking yard in Oregon. When asked why he left it there, he was vague and did not provide clear answers. Investigators later indicated they believed both Joshua and Michael were involved in Susan's murder. Despite extensive searching, Susan's case remained unsolved and hopeless. By May 21, 2013, the West Valley City Police officially closed the investigation into her disappearance. In the same year, James Manley, the psychologist who assessed Joshua for the state of Washington, acknowledged that he had always suspected Joshua was connected to Susan's disappearance. However, he did not include these suspicions in his official report, as his role was to evaluate Joshua's parenting, not to investigate a crime. The legal dispute over Susan's estate continued for years. In March 2015, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, finally prevailed in a lengthy legal battle against Terrica and Alina Powell, who had attempted to declare Susan legally dead in order to collect life insurance. As a result, Chuck gained full control of the estate. In 2019, a surprising revelation came to light. KSL, a radio station in Salt Lake City, reported on its detailed podcast about Susan's case, called Cold, that disturbing child abuse material found by West Valley City Police, which contributed to Joshua losing custody of his sons, did not actually belong to him. In fact, it wasn't even found on his computer. The explicit images were located on a second-hand computer that Susan had bought from fellow members of her LDS church. The previous owners had viewed the content, but by the time this information surfaced, it was too late to rectify the situation. The damage had already been done. In early 2022, there was one final attempt to locate Susan's remains. A team led by Dave Sparks, known from the TV show Diesel Brothers, searched a remote mine shaft in the Utah desert in hopes of bringing Susan home. They discovered rib bones, what looked like human vertebrae, and pieces of clothing, indicating that someone had died there. The remains were sent for DNA testing, but once again, there was no success. The bones did not belong to Susan, and they were not even human. A pair of pants found with the remains tested positive for male DNA, raising another question: to whom did they belong? More importantly, will Susan Powell ever be found? Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case. The case of Paul Lambert. The world is full of mysteries, and sometimes danger is closer than we realize. Today's story illustrates how even ordinary events can become a nightmare for someone. Paul Lambert, who was born Paul Scales, was born in 1980 in Queensland, Australia. He had an older sister and several half-siblings from his father's side. When Paul was 4, his parents decided to divorce and agreed that their mother would have custody of the children. Despite facing some challenges during this time, Paul appeared to be a typical child. However, as time went on, his mother began to notice troubling behaviors in him. She took him to a doctor, who diagnosed him with a disorder related to his parents' separation, suggesting that it would improve over time. Unfortunately, several years passed, and Paul's behavior continued to deteriorate. By the time he was 10, his mother was nearly in despair, as her son had become completely uncontrollable. He was diagnosed with multiple conditions, including attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and began treatment that seemed to provide some relief. Despite facing many challenges, Paul excelled in school. In 1998, he graduated from high school and enrolled at the Queensland University of Technology to pursue a degree in business and finance. His intelligence allowed him to succeed with ease. After completing his studies, he obtained a job in the finance department of a motorcycle dealership in North Queensland, where he worked as part of a large team. His co-workers found him charming, articulate, intelligent, and friendly, always ready to assist others. He even helped a colleague raise funds for her daughter's medical treatment. However, that is only a part of his personality that he wants to show to everyone. Although he appeared kind and generous, regularly donating to charities and supporting friends and family, his true nature was known only to his family. In reality, he was a manipulator struggling with mental health issues who refused to seek help. A skilled liar, Paul used his eloquence to achieve his aims, often employing threats of self-harm as a tactic to manipulate others. From 2003 to 2010, Paul had several different girlfriends, all of whom were beautiful. However, a troubling pattern emerged in his relationships. He exhibited extreme aggressive behavior. By the 6th year, 5 different women had obtained restraining orders against him, But even this did not stop him. He violated several of them and was held accountable. Paul treated all his ex-girlfriends similarly. They described him as a manipulator who sought to control their lives in a cruel manner. He frequently belittled them emotionally and even became violent when discussions about breakups arose, creating unsafe conditions for their well-being. Paul had a troubling habit. He would reach out to the families of girls who tried to leave their unsatisfactory relationships. Whenever he sensed that he was losing control, he would repeatedly call the girls' relatives, trying to intimidate and stalk them. His goal was to delay the breakup and keep his latest partner with him for as long as possible. To do this, Paul made up stories and attempted to hide his actions. When the truth came out and difficult conversations started, he often blamed his mental health issues. It seemed he genuinely believed that his disorders could excuse his cruel and irrational behavior. However, the girls and their families insisted that he needed to seek help from a psychiatric clinic. Unfortunately, he did not seek help on his own, and law enforcement did not take action, allowing another girl to fall under his influence. Paul claimed to have dissociative identity disorder, describing his personalities as good and evil, and sometimes giving them names. He admitted that he might have as many as 9 different personas. Despite this, Paul was a charismatic individual with a strong ability to charm women. He was attractive, but his idealized relationships quickly fell apart, typically lasting no more than a month. In 2014, he tried to settle down by proposing to his ex-girlfriend Samantha, whom he had dated in 2008. However, their relationship ended due to his aggressive and cruel behavior, which included stalking her, although they remained in contact for 6 years, during which Samantha urged him to seek professional help. Paul managed to persuade her that he could be a good husband and would definitely pursue treatment, leading her to agree to marry him. They officially tied the knot on February 2, 2014. Of course, all his promises turned out to be lies. Initially, things appeared to be going well, but within a few weeks the situation started to deteriorate rapidly. After 7 months of living together, their marriage had become unbearable. Paul was losing control, and Samantha felt ready to end the relationship for good. In a last-ditch effort to save their marriage, she suggested they take a trip together. In September 2014, they traveled to Orlando, Florida, hoping to improve their relationship before returning to Australia. Although the trip seemed romantic and had the potential to mend their relationship, once they returned home, Paul continued his old behavior. Unsurprisingly, the situation only worsened. Then, Paul creates a profile on Tinder, presenting himself in the best possible way. He received messages from many women, but was searching for something truly special. He connected with Brittany Killa, a beautiful and well-known 32-year-old television presenter with a promising future. Brittany was using the app to find a relationship, and Paul quickly caught her attention. They began messaging, then exchanged social media and email contacts, and eventually had several video calls on Skype. Paul is completely captivated by Brittany, to the point where he wants to end his relationship with his wife. In March 2015, Paul informed Brittany that he was going to Florida because he wanted to be with her. By this time, they had developed a good rapport. Brittany had no idea that Paul was hiding significant issues. He was adept at concealing his flaws, and Brittany unwittingly became another victim. When Brittany learned about his divorce, she expressed that she didn't want to be the reason for his family's breakup. She asked Paul to stay in Australia, but he lied, claiming he was already divorced and had no ties holding him back. This convinced Brittany to give him a chance, and she agreed to spend 3 months with him to deepen their connection. Finally, they met in person. Although Paul is not officially divorced, he continued to deceive Brittany. At first, he presented himself as a caring and loving man, but soon, his true nature revealed itself. Brittany noticed his odd and unpredictable behavior, which suggested he was struggling to manage his emotions. As a sensible person, Brittany understood that the relationship should come to an end. Unfortunately, this decision was a clear signal for Paul to take action. He started overwhelming Brittany with messages and calls, insisting she spend the next 3 months with him, as they had initially agreed. He believed she could not simply abandon her commitments, claiming he had traveled across the ocean for her, and felt that she had treated him poorly. But all of this was in vain. Paul could not convince Brittany. Then, Paul began telling her that his father had just died, and he needed support, claiming that Brittany was the only close person he had in the US. Ultimately, this worked. She believed his story, thinking that no one would make up something like that. Her father had died from a brain tumor a few years ago, so she understood how hard it was for him. Paul knew about this and intentionally used this trick to manipulate her to lure Brittany into a trap. She supported him and tried to build their relationship. Of course, this didn't affect his behavior. He became increasingly unstable. So after a while, Brittany decided to cut ties again. Then, Paul began to threaten to take his own life. Unfortunately, this trick worked again, and their relationship continued. What bothered Brittany most was her boyfriend's behavior when she had to work away from home for long hours. He sent her dozens of messages and emails, and could even call her when she was on live air. Naturally, this was a significant problem for the journalist, and could potentially cost her the job she had dedicated her entire life to. Brittany couldn't withstand the pressure and tried to break up with him again. Then he started making up new absurd stories that became increasingly bizarre. Paul started telling her that all this time she had not been dating him, but his twin brother, who was the one behaving inappropriately. This time, Brittany did not believe these stories. Then Paul recounted how he had been abused in childhood, claiming that this had led to his current emotional state. Paul again tried to elicit pity from Brittany in every possible way. This whole lie culminated in he confessing that he had a brain tumor and would soon die. Paul added that he was afraid of dying alone. He was once again convincing enough for Brittany to believe him. All of this led to the continuation of their relationship. But Samantha lived in constant fear. She cried every day, and panic attacks began. During the day, Brittany was so tense that she felt constantly unwell. She planned to exit the relationship again, but Paul was prepared to keep her. He threatened to expose naked photographs of her. Now her career, which she had built her entire conscious life around, was at stake. Paul even started sending threatening messages on Brittany's social media, calling her a killer and hinting that he would take his own life if she broke up with him. As a result, Brittany was forced to delete several of her social media profiles. As a public figure, she needed to manage her social media presence to promote herself. Naturally, Paul was aware of this and willingly used it as a means of control. All of this could not continue indefinitely. Eventually, Brittany left him and contacted the police. Like all the previous women in this period, he actively bombarded her with compromising messages and stalked her wherever he could. She reported all of this to law enforcement, who took the case seriously. On May 11, Brittany sent a text message to Paul, warning him not to stalk her anymore and not to try to contact her through any means of communication. Then Paul sent 2 more letters demanding payment in exchange for stopping his harassment. In reality, Paul earned a decent living from extort money. He was very frugal, drove an old car, and rented a tiny, modest apartment. However, in the following days, Paul still showed no signs of stopping his bullying actions. It seemed he was still trying harder to cling to his victim. During this period, he began talking about his 9 personalities. Brittany was in shock and terrified, as she had never dealt with people suffering from dissociative disorders before. Thanks to Brittany's work through social media and television, Paul was able to easily gather information about her. He followed her through news broadcasts and publications, Paul began showing up near Brittany's home and workplace uninvited, and he was able to intimidate her to the point that it became increasingly difficult for her to go on live broadcasts. During those moments, she couldn't feel calm in front of the camera because of the overwhelming fear. Thanks to the lawyer hired by Brittany, Paul was arrested and charged with stalking and extortion. Eventually, he admitted to stalking but again claimed he was insane. During this time, Brittany learned that all of his stories about twin brothers and tumors were false. His father was actually alive and well. She was shocked by the extent of his deceit. Soon after, Paul was deported to Australia and banned from entering the US. After being forcibly sent back to his home country, he changed his last name to Lambert, his mother's maiden name. This seemed to be his attempt to clear his name, which had been tarnished by legal issues. When Samantha found out about his deportation, she contacted the police because she was worried he might try to come back to her since they were still married. As a result, the police issued a restraining order against Paul from approaching her. Despite this, Paul continued to harass her with calls and messages, but she chose not to respond. On February 22, 2016, Paul persuaded Samantha to go with him to a divorce lawyer to sign the divorce papers. She agreed, which turned out to be a grave mistake. During the ride, he began to insult her and threatened to crash the car so they could die together. When Samantha asked to be let out, Paul suddenly sped up, and in the panic, he hit her in the face. Fortunately, she managed to escape from the car and call the police. Paul was subsequently arrested and charged with kidnapping and assault. They finalized their divorce on June 19 of that same year, and Paul faced a Queensland court where he was sentenced to 10 months in prison. However, he was released on parole shortly after. Following his release, he was placed on 12 months of probation and had his driver's license suspended for 2 years. A few months later, he broke the terms of his parole again by moving to another state in Australia and starting a new job without informing his parole officer. Initially, law enforcement was unaware of his actions. Each time he was supposed to check in, he flew from state to state, pretending to live his previous life. It was later discovered that he had much more serious problems than simple depression. From August 2015 to May 2016, he attended numerous therapy sessions with a psychologist. During this time, his behavioral issues also came to the attention of psychiatrists. Although Paul was prescribed several medications, he refused to take them and eventually stopped seeing the specialist altogether. Shortly after his divorce from Samantha, Paul began using his favorite dating app and quickly met a new woman. This woman was Angela J., a 28-year-old doctor who had just finished her residency and worked at a hospital in Sydney, located hundreds of kilometers away from him in another state. Angela was also looking for a life partner after her own difficult divorce. Upon meeting Paul, she felt an immediate connection. They went on their first date, followed by several more, during which Paul acted calmly to win her over. Angela noticed they had a lot in common and eventually invited him to meet her family. While she seemed genuinely happy, her father sensed something was wrong within minutes of meeting Paul. He warned his daughter that this man would bring trouble, but sadly, his warning went unheeded. Angela and Paul had an agreement. She would focus on her career and not be disturbed during the weekdays while working at the hospital, and they would meet on weekends. Initially, everything went well, but soon Angela began to feel uneasy. She sensed that someone was watching her, and discovered that someone had entered her home without permission while she was at work. Paul started to act increasingly provocatively, prompting Angela to end the relationship. When she shared this news, Paul cried and resorted to his usual tactic of threatening self-harm. When she tried to set boundaries, Paul revealed that he had a personality disorder. He escalated the situation by inventing a fake friend named Dan, buying a phone for this imaginary friend, and using Dan to manipulate Angela further, claiming that he was end his life due to her desire to break up. This made Angela feel guilty. Eventually, she agreed to spend some time with him, feeling pressured by her professional ethics as a doctor who wanted to help. Angela made it clear that she only wanted to support his recovery and did not wish to pursue a romantic relationship, which seemed to satisfy Paul. Then, Angela had invited him to a reunion, and when they met, she reiterated that they were just friends. Throughout the evening, Paul acted unpredictably, even stealing Angela's handbag with all her belongings. After several hours of persuasion from some of Angela's friends, her property was finally returned. Angela's sister came to her aid just in time and helped her escape. By morning, the sisters reached out to the police because they had received threatening messages overnight. Initially, the police did not take action, even though they were aware of multiple similar crimes committed by Paul. He had violated 5 restraining orders and the terms of his parole, along with committing various other offenses. The next day, Paul rented a white Corolla hatchback and went to a hardware store to buy a utility knife, an axe, and 2 rolls of tape. While driving, he was pulled over for speeding, but it is more of a routine document check. He was driving illegally since his license was still suspended, but he managed to convince the officer that he was unaware of the restrictions. Surprisingly, the officer let him go. That evening, Paul met Angela at her doorstep, right after she returned from visiting her sister. Once inside, Angela received a frightening message from Paul. Alarmed, Angela ran to her neighbors for help, fearing that Paul might come for her. They assisted her and called the police. Help arrived at her home around 9 p.m., and Angela was taken to the police station. After explaining the situation regarding Paul, a criminal case was opened. Following the police's advice, Angela decided to stay with her relatives for safety. She asked the landlord to change all the locks. To protect herself, she kept knives all over her house so she can quickly defend myself in case of attack. Meanwhile, Paul was near her house, hiding from the police and attempting to buy a weapon. Paul went to a weapon shop but was unable to purchase one due to his suspended license. Later, he returned and asked to buy a hunting knife, which he was given. That same day, he rented a room in a hotel directly across from the hospital where Angela worked. After that, he sent a message to the entire family saying he was going to end his life. However, his relatives, who had tried to help him for many years, were exhausted by his constant lies and stopped responding to such comments. On November 2, Paul returned to the hardware store and bought a crowbar, a hammer, and several zip ties. When Angela came home in the evening and went to her bedroom, Paul suddenly jumped out of the closet and attacked her with a knife. He covered her mouth with his hand, leaving her unable to fight back. However, Angela managed to stall him by asking to go to the bathroom. Terrified, she decided to try to escape. Unfortunately, Paul quickly caught up with her and began stabbing her. The first strikes hit her legs, followed by 11 wounds to her chest and arms. Despite her injuries, Angela somehow managed to get up. Paul then poured gasoline on her and even into her mouth, but she refused to give up and screamed for help. Fortunately, a neighbor walking his dog heard her cries. Realizing what was happening, the neighbor grabbed a crowbar from his work vehicle and rushed to her aid. Angela seized the opportunity to slip out of Paul's grasp, causing him to slip on a puddle and fall. This gave her crucial seconds to escape, and the neighbor helped her reach his house, where his wife called for help and tended to her bleeding wounds as instructed by Angela. Finally, Angela was taken to the hospital, and the police began searching for Paul. However, he had already disappeared by that time. Remarkably, around 7:05 a.m., while Angela was being transported to the hospital, Paul called her. Instead of speaking with her, he only heard the furious shouts of the neighbor who had rescued her. Paul hung up and called his mother. During this call, he told her he intended to take his own life and asked her to apologize to Angela on his behalf. She didn't believe him and hung up. He then called the police, speaking about harming all the women he had known. He claimed he couldn't control himself, and that they would be in danger as long as he was alive. The police tried to convince him to turn himself in, but he simply hung up. Thanks to this call, the police were able to track Paul's location. He was traveling along the eastern coast of Australia. A chase began at 9:15, but Paul was driving so recklessly that the police had to stop the pursuit. They set up spike strips on the road, which successfully halted his vehicle. Paul exited the rented car with a knife and ran down the road until he encountered 3 officers. Although the officers had their weapons drawn, Paul showed no intention of surrendering. He was blinded by a powerful flashlight, which only made him more aggressive. Meanwhile, the police attempted to negotiate with him, urging him to give up, but he seemed intent on dying. Paul even shouted, asking what he needed to do for the officers to open fire. They attempted to calm and distract him, but one of the police officers approached from behind and fired a taser. Unfortunately, the taser failed to make contact because Paul was wearing thick clothing. This infuriated Paul, who then menaced the officers with a knife. Suddenly, multiple explosions rang out from all directions. At 9:37, 36-year-old Paul was shot and killed. His wife was informed of the incident, but she was unable to cry or feel upset. Angela was in the hospital at the time. She had been saved and was not in danger of losing her life despite suffering 11 stab wounds. Upon hearing that Paul could no longer harm anyone, Angela felt a sense of relief. Many women who had been victims of stalking experienced varying degrees of depression and post-traumatic stress, but ultimately, they all managed to rehabilitate and recover. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Jody Myers. One day, 20-year-old Jody Myers and her fiancé, 31-year-old Neil Archer, were attending a birthday party for Jody's stepfather. Although the celebration was lively, Neil was not enjoying themselves. Neil was reluctant to participate and chose to sit in Jody's car while she mingled with family and friends by the fireplace. Jody frequently had to return to the car to convince Neil to join the party. Some guests even brought him snacks in hopes of cheering him up. Around 8:30 p.m., Neil and Jody left the party, and their argument occurred at home. Jody's mother, Lucy, received a message from her daughter stating that she couldn't come home that night because she had broken up with Neil, and she changed her phone number. Jody mentioned she would let her parents know where she was later, that she had moved to a different area, and that she had quit her job. Once things calmed down, she promised to explain everything in detail. Jody also assured her mother that she was safe, that her friends were with her, and she also expressed her love for her family. The message was poorly written and lacked punctuation, which concerned Lucy. She noticed several spelling errors, which were also unusual for Jody, who generally had no issues with spelling and grammar. Normally, if she made a mistake, she would quickly correct it, but in this case, she did not. One possible explanation for Jody's behavior is that she was feeling rushed or stressed after breaking up with her fiancé the night before. However, it was puzzling why Jody would take the time to write a message when she was likely overwhelmed. This causes Jody's mother and sisters to suspect that she was not the one who sent the message. Furthermore, Jody would never abandon her 2-year-old son, Elijah, who she had with Neil. Her family was certain of this. Elijah was the center of Jody's life, and she loved him dearly. Friends and family believed that if Jody had intended to leave, she would have taken him with her. This concern prompted the family to report Jody's disappearance to the police. The family members were reluctant to accept that something terrible might have happened, but they were also worried about losing precious time. Doubts began to arise in their minds, and they feared that the police might not take their report seriously, as cases of missing young women who had argued with their fiancés were often overlooked. However, the police treated Jody's family's report with great seriousness. They were particularly concerned that Jody had left her child behind. which was an unusual situation they couldn't ignore. Detectives quickly launched a search, and public worry grew when it became known that someone had used Jody's bank card to withdraw $250 from an ATM in the city center. This raised the possibility that either Jody was nearby and intended to return, or an unknown person was trying to cover up the situation. Jody Myers was officially reported missing, prompting an investigation. Jody's story quickly gained attention across, especially among investigative teams. Authorities interviewed everyone close to Jody, including her fiancé Neil, but none could provide useful information about her whereabouts. Neil, being the last person to see her, shared details with the police. He revealed that he and Jody had argued on their way home from a party. During the drive, Jody angrily threw her ring out of the window, and the police later searched for it. Neil also stated that he last saw Jody when she got into a red Nissan X-Trail with an unknown man and woman. The police did not disclose that Neil was their main focus. They described him as a valuable witness, but at that point, he was their only person of interest. Extensive searches were conducted in the areas surrounding where Jody was last seen, including local bushland and the Murray River, but no trace of her was found. The ring Jody allegedly threw out of the car also remained missing, despite Neil indicating where it might be. As the investigation progressed, relatives, friends, and acquaintances frequently appeared in the media to discuss the case and share their thoughts. Neil's mother, 57-year-old Margaret Archer, spoke to reporters about her son's partner, Jody. Margaret expressed hope for Jody's return, as she is needed by her son. Meanwhile, Neil addressed the media, responding to their presence outside his house while playing with his son. He took the increased attention calmly, stating only that it was a bit stressful for him, but he was happy to assist the authorities in the investigation. For the purpose of the investigation, the police requested video footage from ATM surveillance cameras and were surprised by what they found. The money had not been withdrawn by Jody or Neil, as they had previously thought. Instead, it was a woman in a hooded sweatshirt, clearly trying to conceal her identity. Detectives quickly identified this woman as Margaret. While her cash withdrawal did not implicate her in murder, she was arrested for theft. It was unclear how Margaret had obtained Jody's bank card and used it after Jody went missing. Margaret might have stolen the card or borrowed it from Jody. Regardless, Margaret strongly denied any involvement in Jody's disappearance, both to the police and in public. After being questioned, she was released on bail, but this unusual situation led investigators to closely examine her actions during the time Jody was missing. Detectives discovered 2 receipts from different hardware stores. Margaret had purchased 10 bags of cement from one store and another 10 bags from a second store, along with a wheelbarrow. These purchases were notable for their large quantity. Investigators needed to verify that these transactions were made by Margaret. They visited the store where Neil's mother had gone 3 days after Jody's disappearance. After reviewing the surveillance footage, they confirmed that Margaret had indeed bought a large amount of cement. However, they questioned why she needed so much. While buying construction materials is not illegal, detectives still needed to understand the context of those purchases. The purchase had been made with the exact amount that Margaret withdrew from the ATM, which left the police confused, until they spoke with Margaret's husband, Lawrence. He explained that on the day Jody went missing, he was in Tasmania. When he returned home, his son Neil told him he had a Father's Day gift. Since Neil rarely showed generosity, he was intrigued. Neil led him to the yard, where a freshly poured concrete slab lay in the shed, which Neil had just finished. Lawrence was surprised, as he thought of Neil as lazy and selfish, but he could see that his son had done a lot of hard work. He thanked Neil for the gift and began sharing stories about his trip to Tasmania. As the detectives listened, they began to connect the dots, realizing that Neil was no longer just a witness. He was now the main suspect in Jody's disappearance. At the same time, Neil's brother, Aaron Archer, felt guilty because he knew something, but was afraid to speak up for fear of implicating his family. Aaron was hesitant to carry out certain tasks requested by relatives. When he learned something troubling, he urged Neil to go to the police, but Neil refused. With no other option, he went to the station and decided to share everything he knew. On September 24, 2015, at midnight, Aaron met with police officers at a predetermined location. Following his brother's visit to the police station, Neil was taken into custody and charged with the murder of his fiancée, Jody Myers. The next day, investigators searched the home of Margaret in Murray Bridge, a town about an hour and a half from Adelaide. During this search, forensic teams discovered a woman's body buried in a shallow grave beneath a concrete slab in the shed. This slab had been a Father's Day gift for Lawrence. Experts later confirmed that the body was Jody Myers, who had been missing for a month. Investigators indicated that the evidence suggested a violent murder had taken place. Afterward, Lucy's son-in-law, Michael Bates, publicly expressed the family's hopes for Jody's safe return until they received the tragic news. Her death created a profound loss for them, but they cherished the loving memories of her as a mother, daughter, and sister, emphasizing that she was not to be blamed for anything. From that point on, the family was left with only memories, which they considered their most precious treasures. A few months later, Margaret was arrested for her alleged involvement in Jody's murder. Despite the charges, Margaret was working hard to prove her innocence. It is believed that Neil's father, Lawrence, was unaware of the events surrounding the case. Then, investigators have built a detailed narrative into the Jody Myers case. After returning home from a party, Jody and Neil had a severe argument. Neil felt that he had not impressed Jody's parents and believed they wanted him and Jody to break up. In a moment of rage, he lost control and strangled Jody with the cord of his hoodie until she stopped breathing. Later, reports surfaced that while in jail, Neil told other inmates that his mother had been present during the argument and had restrained Jody, although this claim could not be substantiated. The following day, Neil asked his mother to help him hide the crime, and Margaret, without hesitation, agreed to dispose of the evidence related to the murder of Jody, who had given her a grandchild. She withdrew cash from the ATM to buy cement and added $10 to Jody's phone to send a message to Jody's family. It became clear that Neil pressured his mother to handle all the illicit activities for him. Margaret had previously been a victim of domestic violence herself, which makes it even more perplexing that she would agree to cover up such a tragic crime. Many people find this behavior abnormal, regardless of a mother's love for her child. It is difficult to believe she would justify helping him in such a horrific situation. However, some parents claim they would do anything for their children, and Margaret likely belonged to this group, which is truly disturbing. Even more alarming is the fact that Jody's 2-year-old son, Elijah, partially witnessed the incident. He was sitting in the car while Margaret visited hardware stores and made purchases. It was also revealed that Elijah was in Margaret's house when Neil transported and buried his mother's body in a shed. As the case progressed, new information shocked the public. The police recorded phone calls between Margaret and Neil discussing how to hide the crime. Both felt guilty and unable to find a solution to their problem. During their conversations, they also mentioned Neil's brother, Aaron. Margaret attempted to involve her second son, and later his half-sister, in the cover-up. She pressured them to burn clothes and destroy evidence, such as cement bags. However, Aaron cleverly refused to comply and eventually reported the situation to the police. In 2016, Neil Archer pleaded guilty to the murder of Jody Myers. In 2017, he was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 22 years. This outcome is relatively favorable by Australian standards, and it is reassuring that the murderer accepted his guilt. In South Australia, a guilty plea can lead to a sentence reduction of about 30%, but the judge determined that Neil did not merit this reduction. Jody's friends and family were pleased with the verdict. Meanwhile, Margaret Archer hesitated until the last moment to admit her wrongdoing. She changed her story and confessed. Her lawyer claimed that Margaret had always lived a good life and cared deeply for her large family. However, considering that she waited until the very end, unwilling to confess to the crime, one can easily conclude that Margaret felt no remorse for her actions. In 2018, she was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison for aiding a criminal. Then, she was released in June 2022. Meanwhile, little Elijah is being cared for by his grandmother, Lucy. In Michigan, there is a small town called Traverse City with a population of about 15,000. It is famous for the picturesque Lake Michigan, on the shores of which several resorts can be found. In the summer, a large number of tourists are attracted by festivals and water sports events. They come to swim, ride boats, enjoy delicious local food, and appreciate the unique landscapes around Lakes Michigan. In the winter, the area is snowy and quiet, there are few tourists, and life flows very slowly. It was in such a place that 18-year-old Kaylee Bruce lived and worked. She was always a cheerful and bright person. In addition, she was very smart, attractive, and determined. By the 1990s, she was considering pursuing an education. Thanks to her academic success in high school, she managed to gain admission to Northwestern Michigan College without any problems. The educational institution was located in Traverse City. To support herself away from her parents, Kaylee worked as receptionist of a local beach condominium company that rented out apartments, rooms, and houses to visitors. The condominium was situated right on the lake and was very popular during the tourist season. On the evening of Monday, February 16, 1998, Kaylee worked at beach condominiums from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. In February, there were virtually no tourists, only a few locals, so she was almost alone in the building. The night before, while talking to her friend Kim, who also worked at the condominium, she had expressed her eagerness for the start of the season, hoping for more guests and an increase in her salary. That same day, with a little over an hour left before the end of her shift, Kaylee had to do some light cleaning, put everything in the utility room, and then go home. That evening, Kim was not on shift but was passing by the beach condominiums at about 7:30 p.m. She had been driving her friends home after they had spent time together at a restaurant. As Kim drove past beach condominium, she looked toward the office through the window and noticed a light in the area of the administration desk, where Kaylee was preparing to close up. Kim wanted to quickly drop off her friends and then stop by to see Kaylee. However, when Kim returned about 40 minutes later, she saw that the light inside was off and Kaylee was nowhere to be found. Thinking she was late and that her friend had already left. Satisfied that her friend had gone home, she turned around and left. The next morning, on Tuesday, February 17, 1998, at about 7 a.m., the first person to arrive at the beach condominium's office was an air conditioning technician named Zachary Medin. He immediately noticed that the door was unlocked. Although this did not cause him alarm, he calmly walked inside and called out Kaylee's name. Receiving no answer, he saw that no one was at the reception desk where Kaylee should have already been preparing for her workday. She was never late and usually arrived early. All the lights were off, and Zachary walked around the floor. He noticed a glimmer through the crack of a door and decided to investigate further. When he got closer, he saw suspicious red stains near the threshold. It was unclear what it was, but when he opened the door, he realized the horrendous nature of the scene. In horror, Zachary ran away and immediately called emergency services at 911. When the police arrived, Zachary could barely speak, looking emotionally traumatized and barely holding back tears as he described the situation. The scene found in the utility room was soon deemed one of the most horrifying crime scenes in local law enforcement history. In the small room, where household appliances and cleaning supplies were stored, there was blood everywhere, on the walls, even the ceiling. In the middle of the room was the mutilated body of a girl. The victim was Kaylee Bruce, the 18-year-old employee. Next to her body lay all the broken pieces, with shards of plastic and metal covered in dried blood, as well as particles of scalp and hair. Kaylee was found naked, with one of the power cords from an iron wound tightly around her neck, cutting into her skin and crushing her larynx. According to the medical examiner's report, the victim had 19 deep lacerations that cut down to the bone. Her skull was crushed from numerous blows, fractures of the vault and facial bones were found. Severe injuries to her neck and throat were consistent with strangulation, indicating she had been beaten for an extended period with blunt objects on her body, abdomen, chest, and pelvis, leading to numerous internal bleeding. The most horrific detail discovered was a metal pin inserted into her perineum with such force that it damaged the tissues up to the pelvic bone, penetrating several centimeters into it. According to forensic experts, Kaylee remained alive for some time after sustaining this injury until she eventually bled out. Her death was undoubtedly a painful one. The entire small utility room was covered with her blood, and it was smeared over her body as if she had fought back. Despite the small size of the room, it took forensic experts 6 hours to collect dozens of pieces of evidence. They discovered numerous defensive injuries, indicating a brutal struggle, along with signs of disorder around the area. Apparently, Kaylee's resistance only angered her attacker. Footprints and similar traces were found strewn on the floor, suggesting that the attacker had jumped on Kaylee in an attempt to cover this terrible incident. Local reports described the scene, and the first thing that struck the arriving journalist was the amount of blood. He immediately realized they were dealing with one of the most terrible crimes in the town's history. Despite years of experience reporting from dozens of bloody crime scenes, he had never seen such cruelty before. He labeled the criminal a real monster and couldn't comprehend what could drive someone to commit such an atrocity against an innocent 18-year-old girl. Kaylee Bruce died at about 8 p.m. the previous day. It is possible that when Kim was standing outside the office, her friend was already beyond help. She herself miraculously avoided a collision with the killer. Kaylee's family was shocked by such a brutal murder and could not understand who could wish harm to such a sweet girl. Relatives, friends, and acquaintances told detectives that Kaylee was a very nice and kind person. No one had ever heard anyone speak badly of her. It was hard to imagine that someone would have a motive to attack her. Some items were missing from the crime scene, but nothing significant, so the theory of a robbery gone wrong was not considered. Detectives suspected that the perpetrator must have known Kaylee personally, given the brutal nature of the attack. Revenge, hatred, or jealousy seemed likely motives. The attacker was probably observing her and knew her daily routine, allowing him to choose the moment when Kaylee would be most vulnerable. He likely knew when to strike so that no one would be nearby, and she might have trusted him. They decided to search for the criminal among Kaylee's immediate acquaintances and among local residents who might have been in regular contact with her, possibly even living nearby. Unfortunately, there were no CCTV cameras on the premises of the resort or even inside the office, which left them without clues. All the blood at the crime scene was analyzed and confirmed to belong to the victim, but no fingerprints could be found. It was clear that the perpetrator had some criminal experience. He was probably wearing gloves or had carefully erased all traces of his presence. The forensic team collected more than 100 pieces of evidence from the small utility room. The only trace left by the aggressor were boot prints found on the body and the bloody floor. Forensic experts used a special substance that allowed them to obtain a clearer pattern of the shoe's sole along with all the small details. When the police received a full footprint, they assessed the killer's size. He had to be a tall, strong man who wore large shoes. The print had a clear tread, resembled work shoes. Detectives visited local stores to find a similar pair and discovered that the prints matched shoes from a brand called Pajar. When combined with the prints found on Kaylee's body, they turned out to be identical, leading to a person who likely used specific clothing. The young man who worked in the condominium quickly attracted the authorities' attention, Zachary Medden, who discovered the body and reported it to the police. Detectives were alarmed that he had gone to the police to report finding the body. This was a tactic sometimes used by murderers hoping to remove suspicion from themselves and gather information about the progress of the investigation. Zachary was taken to the station for an official interrogation to verify and exclude him from the list of suspects. He was still visibly shaken by what he had seen, struggling to control himself, and appeared sincere. Zachary voluntarily allowed his car to be searched. The investigation had reached a dead end, with no valuable information emerging and all suspects cleared. The excitement in a local community was reaching its peak. It became almost impossible to buy a regular pepper spray for self-defense, as supplies were quickly depleted. The main customers were schoolgirls and female students, afraid to walk alone or go out at night. One of the detectives arrived at the college dormitory where Kaylee studied, and witnesses reported several suspicious young people who had already checked in there. They needed to be checked. In the end, it turned out that they were not involved. The detectives spoke to their friend Kim, who knew Kaylee better than anyone else in the city. She said that shortly before the murder, Kaylee had broken up with her boyfriend, whose name was Dylan. They broke up and started dating again. As far as Kim knew, they had broken up again, but Dylan desperately tried to renew contact with Kaylee. He was obsessively persistent, even manipulative. They talked to him just 2 days after the murder. Dylan worked with heating, air conditioning equipment and serviced the units. They immediately noticed that he had boots of the brand Pilar, similar in size to the footprints found at the crime scene. Dylan had several pairs of the same brand, which were immediately sent to the laboratory for examination. However, no traces of blood could be found on them. Of course, he could have had other similar boots that he got rid of after the attack, but no matter how hard the police tried, they could not find any evidence against Dylan. Additionally, he had a reliable alibi, so he was excluded from the list of suspects. The killer could now be tens or even hundreds of kilometers away from the condominium, but the degree of cruelty suggested great hatred or sadistic inclinations. They were looking for all criminals prone to attacking women who had recently been released from prison and lived in the area. However, all efforts were in vain. During the inspection of the hill, a small metal rod was found. It was a part of a car tire valve. On it, they found Kaylee's blood and several hairs that did not belong to her. One of them had an entire follicle, which allowed them to create a DNA profile of the probable criminal. Hopes for this were still low as the technology at the time was not yet perfect. In any case, this version needed to be checked, and that took time. They decided to use all the meager materials available to them. They organized a press conference and appealed to the public. The key moment on which they focused was the problem of numerous false statements. People contacted the police station, and all leads were checked. One person who contacted them was a local resident who worked as a presenter at a radio station. His name was John Chandler. He immediately noted that his information could help find the criminal. On February 26, 1998, 10 days after the murder of Kaylee and following the press conference, John went to change the tires on his car. Near the resort area, there was an industrial park and a tire factory that he visited. While in the waiting room, he accidentally overheard the manager talking to the rest of the staff, trying to find one of the workers. The employees were discussing that a technician had not shown up for work and had not been seen for several days. They had all seen the press conference, so they suspected something was wrong. There were rumors that the missing man had a very bad character. One colleague mentioned that a day after the murder of Kaylee, he had seen this technician wearing boots of the brand Pajar, which had suspicious dark spots. A day later, he bought himself new shoes and did not wear that pair again. After hearing all of this, John immediately called the police station to request that they check this tip. He felt that this information was very important, and the detectives were convinced of its significance. They went to the tire factory. The manager immediately admitted that John's words were true. Colleagues that morning had discussed one of the employees of the organization, who turned out to be 25-year-old Kevin Holzer, the son of the director of the company. Several employees confirmed that he always wore large-sized Pajar boots while on shift. A few days after the murder, he had a new pair. After examining the area where Kevin usually worked, detectives noticed that small metal rods from tire valves were lying around on the floor. They looked very similar to the evidence from the crime scene. Local workers confirmed that these rods often flew off when changing tires. Now the police were sure that John's statement was leading them in the right direction. Their suspicions only grew stronger when they found out that Kevin had been renting a room in beach condominiums where Kaylee worked for 6 months. He had the opportunity to observe her, calculate her daily routine, and choose the right time when she would be alone. In fact, Kevin spoke with investigators as early as 8 a.m. on February 17th, when Kaylee's body was found. He was the only one who did not ask what had happened, which seemed strange. Kevin claimed he had quickly gone to work at the plant. Due to the lengthy process of examining the crime scene and collecting evidence, the detectives did not have the necessary clues when they spoke to Kevin. It became apparent that the criminal could have been in their hands from the very first minutes of the investigation, but he managed to slip away. The new main suspect was now wearing Pajar boots of the same size. It was decided to reanalyze the collected data and follow up on everything the local residents had said. The detectives spoke to one resident of Beach Condominiums. She said that, day of the attack, she returned home from work in the evening at about 10 p.m. The door was open, although she perfectly remembered locking it. It turned out that the master key had disappeared from the reception desk. Suspicions against Kevin were confirmed by Kaylee's friend Kim, who said that he often ran into the office and lingered at the reception desk while Kaylee worked there. Kim believed that Kaylee liked Kevin, so he tried to spend any free minute chatting, even on far-fetched topics. He constantly asked to be let into his apartment with spare keys, which only the condominium administrator had access to. He claimed that he had forgotten or lost his own key. It seemed he was just looking for a reason to get closer to Kaylee. Kevin was tall, athletic, practiced martial arts. He looked like a likely killer, but they failed to find him. He simply ran away. In search of additional information, they went to the tire factory where he worked and checked the guy's biography. They managed to find out that Kevin had problems with the police 5 years before the murder. He had been accused of abuse. In the late hours, Christina was returning home from a bar when a stranger grabbed her and dragged her into an alley, then began to beat her. She sustained very serious injuries and was sure that she was saved by a miracle. Realizing that the criminal wouldn't stop, Christina pretended to be dead and offered no resistance. As soon as she stopped moving, the criminal simply lost interest and left. Apparently, the attacker enjoyed beating and killing women, which was very disturbing. The potential serial killer could be anywhere, and now no one was safe. Trying to understand the moment when Kevin escaped, they realized that he had disappeared from all radar as soon as the press conference was over, which announced the size, brand of the shoes and the tread pattern he had worn before. In order to scare off the probable killer, the police obtained an arrest warrant and went to his apartment, but nothing valuable for their investigation could be found. There were no bloody shoes or clothing, and they even checked the drains in the bathroom, but found no traces of blood. This puzzled the detectives. Around the same time, a friend named Mike contacted the police station. He was very worried and said that he might know where to look for Kaylee's killer. Just before this, he and his friend, Kevin, had spent Friday night at a club. They were drinking and chatting after a new press conference had been held. Detectives got a warrant for Kevin's arrest. During the party, Mike's phone rang. On the other end was another friend who asked where Kevin was, that the main suspect in the murder who was sitting across from Mike. Kevin became noticeably nervous, but Mike managed to say that his girlfriend had called and asked him to come home. Kevin did not suspect anything and said it was time for him to go. Mike walked Kevin to the parking lot, where they said goodbye and went their separate ways. As soon as Kevin disappeared from sight, Mike immediately called the police station, providing a description of Kevin's car and clothing. Mike had said he was heading south but gave no exact directions. Kevin was driving a noticeably gold-colored car, which was quickly tracked down. Detectives arrived at the parking lot, but the car was abandoned, and Kevin was not there. It seemed he had managed to escape punishment again. The police spoke to the guard, who admitted that he had talked with Kevin for a long time before Kevin fled. He reportedly headed to Indiana and planned to use the train. The detectives were following Kevin closely, but he was slightly ahead. During this same period, testing of hair found on the metal part of Kaylee's body was completed. The blood from this small piece belonged to Kaylee Bruce, while the hair was male. Samples were taken from Kevin's apartment, allowing for a comparison of the criminal's DNA profile, which matched completely. They feared that he, like a cornered animal, could start killing again, but they managed to intercept and arrest him. Earlier, During his transfer to Chicago, he had refused to cooperate with the investigation and immediately demanded a lawyer. However, the evidence against him was irrefutable, and the prosecutor considered the trial a mere formality. Detectives discovered that Kevin had moved into the beach condominiums just 6 months before the murder. They suspected that he had not chosen his victim randomly. They believed he probably liked Kaylee and became obsessed with her, eventually stalking her. When he found out that Kaylee would be working and studying in the city, he decided to get as close to her as possible. Naturally, all this could not end well. On June 21, 1999, Kevin Holzer's trial began. He was charged with the murder of Kaylee Bruce. Despite his father's wealth and a smart defense attorney, it seemed even the attorney considered his client guilty and did not even attempt to acquit him. In October 1999, the jury decided that Kevin Holzer was guilty of first-degree murder, and he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In the years since before Kevin was convicted of abuse, there may have been more attacks. Their suspicion was investigated, but it was not possible to confirm these assumptions. Everyone in his circle was in danger. In which, the witness finds her apartment door open when she comes home from work. She is shocked by the lucky coincidence that she was missed by Kevin Holzer. The police believed this was not an accident. He had stolen the master key and used someone else's apartment because he knew that no one would be there for quite a long time. After the massacre, he entered someone else's territory to take a shower and wash away the traces of the attack. Kevin actually had no feelings for Kaylee except cruelty. Any girl could have been in her place. He intentionally found excuses to approach her, chat with her, and ask for her keys because he wanted to learn how to get them. He carefully calculated Kaylee's schedule as soon as she first talked to him. The lives of Traverse City residents were divided into before and after the murder of Kaylee Bruce. This massacre was so cruel and senseless that the crime is still imprinted in the memory of many townspeople. Shanti Cooper was a devoted mother to her son, Jackson, 8, who she shared custody of with her ex-husband, Jim Cooper. After separating from Jim in 2013, Shanti was ready to begin dating again. She quickly realized that online dating had become the common way to meet people, so she decided to give it a try by creating a chat account. While exploring different profiles on the site, Shanti connected with a few men, but none impressed her quite like David Trance. David had also recently ended a year-long marriage, was looking for something fresh and exciting. Their relationship deepened through phone calls, text messages, and emails. After several months of getting to know each other, David made a significant decision to move to Orlando, Florida, to be closer to Shanti. Their relationship evolved into something more intimate, while Shanti remained committed to her son. She made sure that her time with David didn't compromise her responsibilities as a mother, always putting Jackson's well-being first and ensuring that everyone understood the importance of a healthy family dynamic. In 2015, Shanti and David relocated to Delaney Park, an upscale suburb close to downtown Orlando. This neighborhood is known for its beautiful environment and family-friendly atmosphere, attracting an affluent community. Delaney Park offers a high-quality lifestyle along with an excellent school system that delivers quality education. Its well-maintained landscapes and access to various amenities make it an attractive choice for families looking for a comfortable and safe home. In here, David bought a house for $600,000 in cash. The home is 4,000 square feet, featuring a pool, a garage, and an apartment above it. This spacious property offered them a comfortable living space with plenty of amenities. Shanti and David were excited to settle into their new house and start a new chapter in their lives. However, they soon noticed that some features of the home did not meet their expectations for the future. While they loved their new house, the upstairs bedrooms felt small and were not very functional. Facing this challenge, David and Shanti began a renovation project to turn their house into their dream home. Shanti, passionate about design and home improvement, agreed to fund the project. They hired a skilled team of contractors who completely dismantled the house to rebuild the upstairs bedrooms and create a new layout that met their vision. During the renovation, the bedrooms were unusable, so Shanti moved into the apartment above the garage. This arrangement allowed her to maintain her daily routine without interruption and provided a dedicated workspace. David, on the other hand, stayed in a makeshift area in the garage, spending quality time with their dogs. David became deeply invested in the restoration. It was no longer just a project but a vital part of his life. He spent every waking moment monitoring the work, making adjustments, ensuring every detail was carefully planned and executed. His entire focus was on the renovation, and the house began to take on a character of its own. In 2018, 3 years after starting the renovation project, there was barely any progress. The inside of the house had been completely stripped down, leaving only the bare structure. Seeking a solution, David reached out to a local home renovator known from the successful A&E reality show, Zombie House Flipping. This show features real estate investors who buy and renovate rundown homes. The show's producer contacted David and Shanti about their home in Delaney Park to see if it could be included in the next season. During the chaos of their home renovations, David and Shanti got married in 2017, which surprised many friends and family. Shanti, who is naturally private, even kept the marriage a secret from her beloved grandmother. By mid-April 2018, the show Zombie House Flipping planned to start filming at David and Shanti's home in May. However, the producer struggled to get them to discuss how the show would proceed. The producer noticed a clear contrast between David's excitement and Shanti's apparent disinterest. David was eager about the flipping series, while Shanti seemed to participate just to support her husband. The tension over their home was evident, as Shanti had invested a lot of money in the renovations, yet her name wasn't even on the trust that owned the house. Although David promised to include Shanti on the trust, he did not follow through, leading to further issues in their relationship. By the end of April 2018, David and Shanti seemed to be doing well. However, on April 24, 2018, at 3:51 p.m., David called 911 in a panic, saying he had found his wife, Shanti, in the bathtub and that she wasn't breathing. During the call, David's screams were audible as he desperately tried to explain the situation. When the police arrived at their home, they discovered Shanti had passed away in the bathtub. The area was secured, and an investigation began, while David was taken to the police station for questioning. David recounted to investigators that the morning had started normally. He said Shanti woke up between 7 and 7:30 a.m. At around 9:30 a.m., he left for a 1-hour walk, leaving Shanti at home. When he returned, he claimed he took measurements for renovations. After that, David stated he left again around noon to take their dogs to an off-leash dog park near the Orlando Executive Airport. He mentioned that he frequently visited this park to let the dogs play and enjoy the open space. He added that he hadn't spoken to Shanti before leaving the house and assumed she was in the garage apartment relaxing. David told the detectives that after returning home from the dog park, he went outside to do yard work. He worked for about 30 minutes before deciding to go inside. Once inside, he heard water coming from the bathroom, which intrigued him, so he went to check it out. As he approached, he noticed that the bathroom door was slightly open. When he pushed it open, he was shocked to find his wife, Shanti, unconscious in the bathtub, with her body partially submerged in water. In a panic, he called 911 to report what he had found. During the interview, David mentioned that Shanti had been excited about their future and the plans they had for their home. They were both looking forward to a happy life together. Although David seemed distraught and his account of finding Shanti appeared credible, the detective had doubts. There were inconsistencies in his story that raised concerns. When police officers arrived at Trant's home after David's call, they noticed that the bathroom was completely dry, which would be unusual if David had genuinely tried to save his wife from a bathtub filled with water. This detail cast doubt on the truth of David's account. The extent of Shanti's injuries contradicted David's explanation of how she fell into the tub. When her body was examined at the crime scene, it was clear she had extensive blood and bruises that couldn't be attributed to just a fall. An autopsy determined that Shanti died from blunt force trauma and strangulation, marking her death as a homicide. These inconsistencies led the detective to question David about the differences in his account. The detective questioned David about the blood found on Shanti's bed. David claimed it was from her menstrual cycle, but the amount discovered was puzzling and raised more doubts. The detectives explored various theories about why David might have killed Shanti. To provoke a response from David, the detective inquired if their ongoing home renovations had anything to do with Shanti's death, but David denied any connection. The detective also asked if Shanti was upset with David because her name was not on the house title. David insisted that Shanti had no problem with that. The detective began to suspect that Shanti's death might be linked to her life insurance policy, which would pay out $250,000 to David. During the interview, detectives asked David whether Shanti's death was an accident related to rough intercourse. He denied harming her in any way. Despite his denial, the detectives believed there was enough evidence to implicate him in Shanti's murder. They thought he had pretended to cry during the 911 call and the interview to divert suspicion. However, before David left the police station, he agreed to take a polygraph test. It was late at night, and the detectives couldn't find a polygrapher to conduct the test right away, so they allowed David to go home. Before he left, he provided DNA samples, nail clippings, and fingerprints to the detectives for analysis and comparison with evidence from the crime scene. The detectives hoped these samples would help them find more evidence linking David to Shanti's murder. Investigators who looked into the crime scene at David and Shanti's home found several notable details. Shanti had one earring still on and another on her nightstand, along with her watch, which was also found on the nightstand at the time of her murder. These details were important to the detectives because they indicated that Shanti might have been getting ready for bed when she was attacked. Additionally, her cell phone was on the nightstand, but there had been no activity on it after 11:30 p.m. on April 23, 2018. The medical examiner's report showed that Shanti had no defensive wounds, suggesting she was caught off guard by the attack. Detectives theorized that Shanti was sitting on the edge of her bed, taking off her jewelry when David attacked her from behind, leading to her death. They believed David then moved her body into the bathtub. Another important discovery was that nothing seemed to have been stolen from the house, leading the detectives to rule out robbery as a motive. However, Shanti's $155,000 engagement ring was missing. As the investigation progressed, detectives found that David's description of his happy marriage with Shanti clashed with what others believed about their relationship. David often hid Jackson's toys and only returned them when Jackson asked for them. The detectives suspected that David was using these tactics to manipulate both Shanti and her son. While searching the garage where David was sleeping, they found an unplugged refrigerator filled with children's toys. This finding reinforced the detectives' belief that David was engaged in manipulative behavior by intermittently hiding Jackson's toys. David appeared to be trying to control the emotions of Shanti and her son. After detectives executed a search warrant at Shanti and David's home, they seized the couple's computers. On Shanti's computer, they discovered notes revealing her dissatisfaction with her marriage to David. In these notes, Shanti described David as cheap, controlling, and narcissistic. She wrote that he never paid when they went out to eat, and on the rare occasions he did, he would make excuses, claiming he forgot his wallet. Shanti shared feelings of sadness and loneliness, expressing her fear. She desired to no longer be part of their life together. She indicated that her mental unhappiness was largely due to her difficult interactions with David. Additionally, the notes showed that living in a house under construction added significant stress to her life. As the detectives investigated Shanti's murder, they uncovered significant information linking David to her death. It was found that Shanti had been hospitalized for 3 days prior to her body being discovered. The detectives learned that she had expressed worries about her eating habits, telling her nanny that she could no longer tolerate spicy foods or drink alcohol. Furthermore, Shanti was experiencing rapid weight loss, which raised more suspicion among the investigators. They were confused by the toxicology tests conducted during her autopsy, which did not reveal any toxic substances in her body. Despite the lack of evidence, they began to suspect that David might have been poisoning Shanti, but they were uncertain about the specific substance responsible, as nothing was detected in the tests. David had been married before he wed Shanti, which prompted detectives to investigate his previous marriage. They found out that his first wife, Carol, suffered from health problems similar to Shanti's. David met Carol on a blind date in 1997, and they married 2 years later. The detectives were concerned about a possible link between Carol's health issues and Shanti's rapid decline in health. Shortly after their marriage, Carol began facing various health challenges, including persistent nausea, fainting spells, severe reactions to spicy foods and alcohol. Some of her close friends suggested to the detectives that David might have started poisoning her after they got married. To learn more about David's past, the detectives traveled from Florida to Minnesota in November 2018 to interview Carol in person. During the recorded interview, Carol described her struggles with chronic pain and immune system problems that remained undiagnosed. She stressed the need to understand her background to grasp the context of her health issues and mentioned that David was the one who cooked their meals during their marriage. The detectives asked Carol about the possibility that David was involved in her health issues, noting it was suspicious that both of his ex-wives faced similar health problems. Carol firmly denied any suggestion that her ex-husband had poisoned her, stating that her health issues continued even after they separated. During the investigation into Shanti's murder, detectives received a call from an employee at Club Orlando, a private men's spa. The club provided amenities like hot tubs, pools, a gym, and dark rooms for intimate activities. To become a member, individuals needed to buy a pass or membership. The employee informed the detectives that David had multiple memberships at Club Orlando and renewed them every 6 months without exception. He claimed to have seen David engaged in intimate activities with other men. Conversations with Shanti's friends revealed that she would never accept her husband having same intimate relationships. This raised the question of whether Shanti had discovered David's actions and threatened to leave him. As the investigation progressed, the detectives thoroughly reviewed all evidence, including information from an employee at Club Orlando. They sought to find out if David's spa membership and the reported intimate activity could shed light on Shanti's death. When the forensic results arrived from the state crime lab, they revealed Shanti's DNA under David's fingernails and his fingerprints were the only ones found in the bathtub. This evidence contradicted David's story, in which he stated that Shanti had accidentally fallen while entering the tub. The detectives had anticipated finding Shanti's fingerprints in the tub as well, but they were absent. On August 29, 2018, David was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, and he was denied bail. His friends were shocked by the news, as they found it hard to believe he could be responsible for Shanti's murder. They suspected that the police were looking for an easy resolution and not thoroughly investigating to find the true culprit. However, the detectives carried out a detailed investigation, following all leads regarding Shanti's murder before making the arrest. Additionally, the detectives considered Shanti's ex-husband, Jim Cooper, as a potential suspect due to their rocky divorce, which raised concerns about whether Jim might have harmed Shanti. After interviewing Jim, the detectives were able to eliminate him as a suspect based on his alibi. After David was arrested, police searched his mother's home in Orlando, where he had been living. In a suitcase, they found Shanti's missing engagement ring, which had gone missing the night she was murdered. This discovery strengthened their case against David. On April 18, 2019, almost a year after Shanti's murder, prosecutor Ryan Vecchio was meeting with Orlando Police Inspector Teresa Sprague when David's attorney called. At the time, David was represented by Robert Mandel, who called after receiving Sprague's investigative report. After some deliberation, Robert Mandel informed him that he had hired private investigator Billy Lane from Prison Break Investigations to investigate the case and that he had some papers in his home. ASA Vecchio asked him where these papers came from and Robert informed him that they were taken from the loft apartment David was staying in at the time of the murder and that the police had missed them. He informed him that these papers had been packaged as evidence and kept by Billy Lane at his office in Lakeland and that they planned to test the blood and DNA at some point. They had now kept these papers for 11 months without revealing them. Inside the brown evidence bag, which was marked and labeled, were bed sheets, a fitted sheet, a pillowcase, and a pair of black socks. Police also found a green cord collected from the Tron's home that had been found wrapped around a wooden beam from a ladder. Although the strangulation marks were not easily visible, Shanti had an unusual linear cut on the right side of her neck with possible strangulation marks on both sides. Using gloves and magnifying glasses, Investigators examined the entire cord for evidence of blood but found nothing that could be seen with the naked eye or under a magnifying glass. In July 2019, a jailhouse informant came forward with important details about a confession from David. The informant said that Shanti had found text messages on David's phone that exposed his intimate relationships with multiple men. This led to a heated argument where Shanti expressed her anger, threatened to expose him, and demanded a divorce. The informant claimed that David admitted to blacking out before he hit Shanti, which ultimately caused her death. Additionally, the informant stated he had known David before being incarcerated and had seen him at Club Orlando. He also revealed that David mentioned cambo, a toxic secretion from an Amazonian giant monkey frog used in controversial treatments. David had allegedly told the informant that this substance could be a poison that kills without leaving traces in a toxicology report. David's trial was postponed due to the global issue, which affected many legal proceedings across the country. As a result, there were significant delays in his case, lasting almost 2 years. Finally, in 2022, the trial began. However, it took an unexpected turn when both the defense and prosecution's medical experts evaluated David, determined that he was not competent to stand trial, concluding that he was experiencing severe symptoms of schizophrenia. In October 2023, after a 6-day trial, a jury found David Trance guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Shanti's son, Jackson, now lives with her ex-husband, Jim Cooper. Shanti, a devoted mother and woman searching for love, stability after a difficult divorce, fell victim to David Trance's manipulative and violent betrayal. Her death at their Delaney Park home, amid a stalled renovation that symbolized the breakdown of their marriage, underscored the dangers of broken promises and hidden motives. David's sentencing in October 2023 brought justice, but it did not erase the pain endured by Shanti's son, Jackson, and her loved ones. In the Italian province of Bergamo, the municipality of Cologno al Sirios has around 10,000 residents. Femicides are a significant concern here, with many women being harmed by their former or current partners. In 2019, Zinaida Solinari, a 36-year-old woman originally from a small village in Moldova, was living in Cologno al Sirios. She had resided in Italy for nearly 15 years and had made some progress toward achieving her dreams. Like many young women who leave their home countries in search of a better life, Zinaida aimed to establish herself abroad. She arrived in Italy in 2004 at the age of 21, hoping to find employment and eventually a husband to create a happy life. Right after moving to Bergamo, Zinaida began her new life and work. She was a vibrant and attractive young woman who received a lot of attention from men, but she was not looking for a short-term fling. She wanted to find a husband. A few years later, she met a man named Maurizio Quattrochi, who was 11 years older than her. He appeared trustworthy and kind. She was immediately drawn to him. It's important to mention that Zinaida lived with her daughter, whom she had at the age of 16. At the time of their move, her daughter was 5 years old. Maurizio welcomed her daughter as if she were his own and later adopted her. Zinaida hadn't yet made many friends in Bergamo. From the start, Maurizio treated her and her daughter beautifully, offering a sense of security that won Zinaida over. They began a relationship that quickly became serious. Maurizio was a painter and bricklayer with a troubled past that included several criminal offenses, which he chose not to share with Zinaida, a fact she later discovered. He had been convicted multiple times for buying stolen property and had several instances of driving under the influence. Despite this history, he treated Zinaida and her daughter with great care. In late 2004, they married. The following year they welcomed their first daughter, with a second daughter arriving 4 years later. Maurizio was dedicated to his family, but he had a fiery temperament. Zinaida affectionately called him a hot Italian, believing it to be part of his charm. She worked to smooth over any tensions. For many years, their relationship appeared loving and understanding. However, beneath the surface, there were troubling issues. Zinaida's family soon learned about Mauricio's bad temper. He was impulsive and aggressive. His jealousy began to strain their relationship, particularly after Zinaida took a job as a waitress at a popular restaurant in mid-2019. Maurizio was unhappy with her job because many men frequented the restaurant, and his financial struggles heightened his jealousy. Especially as Zenaida's salary allowed her more independence, made her the family's primary earner. At the restaurant, Zenaida met a woman who was also from Eastern Europe. They discovered they had a lot in common. Her colleagues soon noticed the tension between Zenaida and her husband, Maurizio. During Zenaida's first week at her new job, Maurizio came to the restaurant because she hadn't answered his calls. He raised his voice at her, and her colleague could see that Zenaida flinched at every loud sound, revealing her fear of her husband. After that incident, Zenaida shared with her colleague that Maurizio was jealous, upset because she had become more independent and had slipped out of his control. Despite this, Zenaida was determined to stand her ground, not give in to his demands, so she continued working at the restaurant, hoping that her husband would eventually adjust and stop pressuring her. The situation was worsening, seemed to be getting out of control. Her colleague noticed that after several months of working at the restaurant, Zenaida had lost a significant amount of weight and appeared very anxious, which was quite concerning. Zenaida usually dealt with her problems on her own, seldom talked about her life. However, it was clear that her marriage was failing. After 13 years, Zenaida realized it was time for a change. She understood how dangerous her husband was after a fight that occurred just before the tragedy. Unfortunately, she didn't have time to respond. Around 2 a.m. on October 6, 2019, the city police received a report about a woman who had been injured. When officers arrived at Via Alberto de Giussano, it was too late to help her. She had already died. The woman was 36-year-old Zenaida Solinari. Police quickly interviewed her family and friends. Zenaida was found in the courtyard of her sister Oksana Solinari's house, where she had been living recently. Oksana had moved to Italy after Zenaida, and her life had been more settled since marrying Lucio Carlo Di Dio. Oksana informed the police about the difficulties Zenaida faced in her marriage. She believed the event was a result of Mauricio's ongoing aggressive behavior. Just before the tragedy, Zenaida had made the decision to leave her husband, believing it was her only option after a recent family conflict. In private, Zenaida confided in Oksana that Maurizio had threatened her, saying if she tried to leave, he would kill her and then take his own life. From that point, Zenaida understood that the man she thought was her protector could actually be a serious threat to her safety. She shared her experiences of aggression, physical abuse, and how she had to call the police after her last fight with Maurizio. At that time, Zenaida had 3 children, but her husband was indifferent and consumed by jealousy. He was behaving violently, and it was only when the police arrived that he calmed down. Although Zenaida chose not to file formal charges against him, she spoke to the police out of fear for her safety. She thought that moving out of the house was the best way to protect herself and her children. After leaving, she hoped Maurizio would eventually calm down so they could officially get divorced. However, Zenaida did not recognize that the period when a woman tries to escape the control of an abusive partner is often the most dangerous time, both during the decision to separate and the act of leaving. Zenaida opened up to several friends about her husband's frequent episodes of intense jealousy. She shared that he not only yelled at her but also physically assaulted her. However, when speaking with detectives, she did not mention the threats of violence. She minimized the severity of her situation, claiming that her husband had never physically harmed her until mid-2019, despite his aggressive demeanor and constant emotional pressure. Zenaida believed she could manage her circumstances alone. Just 2 hours before she was murdered, a patrol of carabinieri drove by her sister's house. Oksana was aware that Maurizio was searching for his wife. He had come to visit her that evening and hadn't been seen since. Concerned for safety, Oksana called the police. The carabinieri checked the area but left without finding anything suspicious. Later that evening, Oksana's husband mentioned seeing a car that looked like Mauricio's parked in a dead end, but they could not locate its owner. If the police officers had been more vigilant, they might have noticed something amiss and potentially prevent the crime. Maurizio Quattrochi was 47 years old, had a history of a bad temper. Recently, he lost his job as a bricklayer, a position he had held for several years. This wasn't the first instance of him being fired, He was previously let go from his job as a cook at a pizzeria due to conflicts with management. Although Maurizio had always been aggressive, Zenaida usually managed to calm him down. However, after losing his job, his anger intensified. He struggled with the pressure of not being able to support his family, which only added to his irritation, especially towards Zenaida's accomplishments. On the evening of October 5th, he was waiting for Zenaida to return home while intoxicated. Just days earlier, Zenaida and her children had moved in with her sister, Oksana, seeking refuge without revealing her plans. She felt there were no other options for support and thought that staying with her sister would allow the children to continue going to their previous school. Zenaida also underestimated the likelihood of Maurizio acting on his threats. She wanted to avoid causing additional stress for their children. The next day after Zenaida moved out, Maurizio quickly found her at his relative's house. They had another uncomfortable conversation, but this time Zenaida chose not to involve the police. She wanted to prevent anyone else from getting hurt and still hoped that Maurizio, with whom she had spent 13 years, would act rationally. Sadly, he had started to see her as an object, making rationality unlikely. Tragically, Zenaida was found outside her sister's house with several stab wounds, some of which were life-threatening. The attacker had cut her throat and stabbed her in the chest, leading to severe blood loss. She died before the ambulance could reach her. At that moment, her 3 daughters were asleep just a few meters away from their mother. When the carabinieri arrived, Maurizio was already gone, having fled the scene of the crime. However, Zenaida's sister had important information about him. Oksana, who was close to her sister, knew details about Mauricio's job, his favorite hangouts, and his car. Her husband, Lucio, noted that an old Peugeot 206 was parked in an alley and that car drove away in it right after the attack. Witnesses provided the police with the vehicle's license plate, allowing them to start the search for him immediately. The police first searched Mauricio's house but found no one there. They then checked his previous workplaces but found them empty as well. He had gone on the run, but there were only a few possible escape routes. The carabinieri were pursuing the suspect and were closing in. However, they worried he might abandon his car and hide in the wilderness. The police monitored checkpoints and cameras along the potential escape paths. Maurizio was quickly located, and a large-scale operation was planned to capture him. They set up checkpoints on the road and stopped cars that matched his description. Despite this, Maurizio managed to briefly slip through the barrier. His escape lasted just under 16 hours. Eventually, a man matching his description was seen walking along the road, several hundred kilometers from the murder scene. Surprisingly, he hadn't traveled far from Oksana's house, as if he was unsure of what to do and was aimlessly wandering while trying to come up with a plan. He was stopped and arrested at the city entrance. The alleged criminal was taken to Treviglio station, charged with first-degree murder, and sent to prison in Bergamo. At this point, Maurizio claimed that Zenaida's death was accidental, insisting he never wanted to hurt his beloved wife. However, her sister, Oksana, reminded him of his earlier threats to kill Zenaida. Oksana was aware that Maurizio had long suspected Zenaida of cheating, frequently accusing her of having affairs with other men, even though there was no truth to those claims. She firmly believed that Zenaida had remained faithful in their marriage, but Maurizio was not convinced. The situation may have worsened due to Mauricio's job loss and Zenaida's newfound independence. She recognized that their family was struggling and that they needed money for basic necessities. Taking a job at a restaurant was her way of supporting herself, her husband, and their children. Unbeknownst to her, this decision stirred intense anger in Maurizio. Rather than being encouraging, he grew increasingly jealous and resentful. His behavior could have been exacerbated by the depression often linked to such issues, but this did not lessen his guilt. Mauricio's behavior was similar to stalking. Maurizio bombarded Zenaida with constant work calls, which severely affected her ability to perform her job. He insisted on constant contact, even asked for photos to prove where she was, what she was doing, and who she was with. Her employer noticed her frequent distractions and advised her to turn off her mobile phone, hoping this would alleviate the situation with her husband. Unfortunately, this only made things worse. Rather than stop his interference, Maurizio started arriving at the restaurant and causing dramatic scenes. Each time, his behavior became more concerning. All these incidents were verified by a friend of Zinaida, whom she met at the restaurant. Although Zinaida preferred not to complain, she shared with her sister that she was overwhelmed by ongoing scandals at home. After long days at work, she would return to face constant accusations of infidelity and jealousy-driven arguments. Trying to defend herself felt pointless. By the end of summer 2019, she experienced physical violence at home for the first time. Instead of addressing their problems and looking for a job, Maurizio turned to drinking, which led to conflicts, left her with bruises. After interviewing the suspect, detectives determined that jealousy was the motive behind this act of femicide. They investigated Mauricio's background to confirm the statements made by Zinaida's relatives and friends. He seemed to be a typical manipulator who was losing control over Zinaida. After losing his last job due to a conflict with his boss, he could only find odd jobs that didn't provide enough income to support the family. This situation led him to alcoholism and increasingly abusive behavior. In contrast, Zinaida was working as a waitress and occasionally as a hotel maid. She also earned extra income through modeling. It became clear that she no longer needed this relationship. From what was known, Maurizio spoke negatively about Zinaida's modeling career, convinced that it was linked to other men, leading him to believe that she was unfaithful. Although he could not find any evidence to support this, he was equally unable to convince his spouse otherwise. After the Carabinieri were first called due to a domestic dispute involving threats, they assessed Mauricio's behavior and advised Zinaida to move out. It was generally accepted that her refusal to file a complaint contributed to her death. Maurizio continued to assert that his attack was unintentional, claiming he simply wanted to talk to his wife and that she was the one who first exhibited aggression. However, the evidence gathered during the investigation contradicted these assertions. Zinaida had remained calm, diffusing all hostility, and consistently tried to avoid conflict. In contrast, everyone who knew Maurizio well described him as extraordinarily aggressive, hot-tempered, and controlling. The fact that the Carabinieri could not find him during their patrol confirmed suspicions that he had set up an ambush and was in hiding. He possessed a kitchen knife, which became the weapon used in the murder. It could not have ended up in his hands by chance. He had taken it with him intentionally, having planned to confront Zinaida from the very beginning. According to the reconstruction of events, late on Saturday evening, Zinaida was returning home from a night shift at the restaurant. The last message she received from her loved ones was a warning. Around midnight, Oksana wished her sister a safe journey and advised her to be careful. When speaking to the police, Oksana expressed that she had a bad feeling, which is why she wrote this message to Zinaida. She had no idea that the future killer was already waiting for his victim outside the house. Zinaida barely managed to stop near the gate of Oksana's house and got out of her car. She had walked only 3 meters when Maurizio attacked her with a kitchen knife, striking her several times with force. However, Zinaida did not lose consciousness. Instead, she began to scream. This noise awakened her neighbors and her sister, who called for help. Unfortunately, the criminal had enough time to inflict a fatal wound on his victim. Even after the neighbors raised a ruckus, he continued the attack, unable to control the anger fueled by jealousy. Realizing what had happened, Maurizio jumped into his car and began to flee. However, this reckless escape was ill-conceived, as there was nowhere for him to hide. The day of Zinaida Solinari's funeral was declared the day of mourning in the city. This tragic news shocked not only the numerous members of the city's Moldovan community but also all other residents. Flags were lowered, and many local establishments were closed. A memorial service was held, attended by an Orthodox priest from Bergamo. Hundreds of concerned citizens came to the church for the vigil, all appalled by the tragic fate of this kind and beautiful woman. White flowers lay on the white coffin, and red ribbons, a symbol of the fight against femicide, were tied at the feet of local residents. Red roses were placed around a fountain in the main square, and candles were lit. Meanwhile, the suspect remained defiant. His story changed several times, resulting in no one believing him anymore. During another interrogation, Maurizio claimed that the meeting was simply to communicate with his wife. After consuming a considerable amount of alcohol, he insisted that he felt a surge of jealousy, which had become increasingly frequent. Throughout the day, he had contacted his wife. Even if Maurizio genuinely wanted to know what his wife was doing that evening, the response did not satisfy him. He attacked her while checking her mobile phone. The Carabinieri discovered that earlier that evening, at about 6 p.m., Oksana had informed her that Maurizio had come to her house looking to see his children. Naturally, Zinaida refused, as she immediately noticed that he was drunk. She told him he could only see his daughters the next day when he had sobered up. This likely intensified Mauricio's jealousy, suggesting that he may have been lying in wait near the house for several hours before attacking his victim. Initially, Maurizio insisted that it was all an accident, then claimed he did not remember anything. His final explanation was that he did not want to kill Zinaida but was unable to control himself due to jealousy. His lies did not clarify whether he had truly been waiting there all that time with a knife or if he had left and returned after the Carabinieri had checked the area. Maurizio maintained that he could not recall anything because of the alcohol he had consumed and even denied bringing a knife with him, claiming he could have found it near his sister Zinaida's house. During interrogations, he also stated that his wife loved him, that she did not deserve such an end, that he believed until the very end that they could be together again and everything would work out. Oksana and Lucio countered this claim, stating that it was a lie. Zinaida had fled because she was afraid of him, felt under constant pressure and control. At the hearing, one of the first to speak was her sister, 32-year-old Oksana. She recounted how she heard a muffled cry for help in her sleep. Instinctively, she felt it was Zinaida. Upon opening her eyes, she heard it again and realized she was right. She immediately woke her husband, and together they rushed into the street, where they saw Maurizio. The attack was ongoing. He was holding Zinaida by the throat, striking her repeatedly. The prosecutor's office rightly labeled this act an extreme form of cruelty, as the criminal was completely out of control. Even in front of witnesses, the assault continued. This brutal act left 3 children without a mother and father. Oksana's words were substantiated by her husband, Lucio, his brother, Alessandro, and her neighbor, Riccardo Passini. They all witnessed the moment of the attack but did not have time to intervene. Everything happened too quickly. When they approached, Maurizio fled. Zinaida's 18-year-old daughter, Vitalia, also participated in the trial. Mauricio's 2 youngest daughters, aged 9 and 13, were not present in the courtroom. They did not want to interact with their father, who had left them orphaned. The girls were placed in Oksana's care. During the hearing, a forensic expert testified that he found 18 wounds on Zinaida's body. 3 of these wounds were inflicted on her face and were identified as defensive injuries on the victim's arms. Another 8 wounds were located on her neck, indicating that this was likely the target area of the killer, as his actions did not correspond with typical unintentional murder. One of the most dangerous blows punctured the aorta at the base of her neck, resulting in severe bleeding. Just a few minutes later, Zinaida lost consciousness and subsequently died. Her relatives held her in their arms during her final moments as she faded before their eyes, bleeding to death until the rescue service arrived. Her last words were, "I can't breathe anymore." Only after hearing her last words did he decide to flee. At that moment, a kitchen knife fell to the ground, which was later found by the police. The prosecution insisted that the attack was premeditated, as the knife found matched one from Mauricio's kitchen set, which was missing from his home. The lawyer tried to justify the defendant in an implausible manner, claiming that he had found a blade near his sister Zinaida's house. Despite this, Mauricio's lawyer continued to advocate for a mitigated sentence and insisted on a psychiatric examination. According to the lawyer, there had been a systematic deterioration in Mauricio's mental state, which became apparent several days before the crime. On that day, Zinaida stated that he had become obsessive, possessive, and much more aggressive than usual. Just before the incident, Zinaida told her sister that her husband had tried to strangle her with a belt from a robe. When Oksana's husband came to help with a move, he noticed that Zinaida's internet cables had been cut, which seemed strange. Furthermore, Maurizio took her mobile phone, indicating that the situation was spiraling out of control. The lawyer believed these were signs of mental problems. However, the relatives of Zenaida did not want to allow the killer to receive a lenient sentence due to claims of insanity. Oksana claimed that her sister had considered breaking up 8 years before the tragedy. Oksana said Zenaida felt like a victim and was afraid that her husband could be dangerous, but she stayed in the relationship for the sake of their children. Zenaida's relatives said she described a miserable 10-year marriage. Maurizio ended his own life, as he had promised, while in custody during the trial. His lawyer commented on his client's death. The hearing shocked Maurizio. He could not bear the shame and disgrace, especially since some aspects, according to him, did not correspond to reality. He was particularly taken aback by witness testimonies that described 10 years of torment, during which his wife had suffered and was denied a divorce. Maurizio expressed regret for his actions but realized he could not turn back time to alter the circumstances of his wife's death. He feared that his daughters would be compelled to testify against him, which would have been an even greater blow. Consequently, Maurizio decided to end his life. He left several suicide notes for his family, but their contents remain unknown. The brutal murder of Zenaida Solinari on October 6, 2019, in Cologno al Sirios marked a devastating loss for her family and the community. Fleeing an abusive marriage, Zenaida sought refuge with her sister Oksana days earlier, hoping to protect her 3 daughters. Her courage to reclaim her independence triggered Maurizio Quattroci's jealousy, culminating in a premeditated attack that ended her life. The court's focus on the crime's brutality underscored the gravity of femicide, a persistent issue in Bergamo, where women like Zenaida face danger from intimate partners. Zenaida's story is a stark reminder of the urgent need for stronger protections and awareness to prevent such tragedies, ensuring no woman pays the ultimate price for seeking freedom. Kapunda, South Australia, was a quiet town where residents felt secure. Inside the Rowe family home, it appeared calm, the lights were off, the house was silent, and the family was asleep. However, just after midnight, a violent struggle ensued. An intruder had entered the house, and in moments, the Rowe family's home became a scene of terror. The next morning, everything appeared normal from the outside. The house seemed unchanged, and nobody was aware of the events that had transpired just a few hours earlier. It would take several days for neighbors to become concerned and to recognize that something was seriously wrong. What happened that night? In 2010, the small town of Kapunda in South Australia was a place where everyone knew each other, life was calm and relaxed. One notable family in the community was the Rowes, who lived a simple but fulfilling life. The father, Andrew Rowe, had moved from England to Australia with his family when he was 3 years old. They settled in Adelaide. As a child growing up in the suburbs, Andrew was friendly and had a passion for fishing trips with his dad. His laid-back personality made him approachable and likable to those around him. As a young man, Andrew met Rose, a lively and cheerful woman who was just a year younger than him. They connected immediately and soon became inseparable. In 1985, they married in a small ceremony with close friends and family. Their happiness grew with the birth of their son, Christopher, in 1987, and later their daughter, Chantel, in 1994. They then started a carpet cleaning business that quickly thrived, giving them financial security. By 2010, Christopher had moved out and was living with his girlfriend nearby, while 16-year-old Chantel was managing both school and a part-time job at a local cafe. That year, Chantel encountered an unexpected challenge. She found out she was pregnant. Despite the obstacles ahead, she was determined to create a future for her child, with her boyfriend, Dylan, providing steadfast support. Life in the Rowe household continued normally until the night of November 8, 2010. Events that unfolded that night would deeply shock the town and lead investigators to search for answers in one of the most brutal crimes the region had ever experienced. After midnight, an intruder broke into the Rowe home and committed a violent massacre. The crime scene was horrifying, with blood covering the floors, walls, and ceiling. Surprisingly, it took 2 days for anyone to notice that something was wrong. Concerned neighbors, disturbed by the unusual silence and lack of activity from the Rowe home, decided to investigate. Looking through the windows, they were met with a shocking sight. Andrew and Rose were found dead in the kitchen, their bodies severely mutilated. Chantel was discovered in her bedroom, and the brutality of her murder was even more unsettling. Each family member had suffered numerous stab wounds, becoming victims of a brutal and merciless attack. The autopsy provided horrifying details. Andrew had been stabbed 29 times, Rose over 50 times, and Chantel 33 times. Disturbingly, Chantel had also been assaulted prior to her murder, making the tragedy even more incomprehensible. While vacationing in Queensland with his fiancée, Christopher first learned about a crime in his hometown through social media. Investigators first focused on Christopher, the lone survivor of the Rowe family, but soon cleared him as a suspect. The investigation took a chilling turn when authorities uncovered disturbing details. After the murders, the killer did not flee in a hurry, rather, they took their time. Evidence indicated that the perpetrator changed into clean clothes and even rested on Chantel's bed. Drag marks revealed that she tried to hide but was pulled from her hiding spot. Robbery was ruled out as a motive since nothing was stolen. Valuables like electronics and cash were untouched. The brutality of the crime suggested either a personal vendetta or the actions of someone with a disturbingly cruel nature. Furthermore, parts of the crime scene seemed to have been wiped clean, suggesting an unsuccessful attempt to eliminate evidence. Bloody footprints led to the front door of the Rowe home but suddenly stopped outside, indicating that the killer deliberately removed their shoes and exited in socks to avoid leaving more evidence. The most shocking discovery was the absence of forced entry. This indicated that the murderer was likely someone the family knew and trusted or had found a discreet way to enter. As investigators looked into the gruesome crime scene, they found that Rose had suffered the most. She had been stabbed over 50 times, much more than the others. She initially survived the attack and managed to make a phone call for help before the killer realized she was still alive. Unfortunately, before she could escape, the murderer came back and continued stabbing her until she was silenced for good. As investigators faced this harsh reality, they began to identify possible suspects. Andrew and Rose had no enemies, financial issues, or ongoing disputes that could explain such a violent crime. This left them considering one probable motive: Chantel. At only 16, Chantel was juggling school, a part-time job, and preparing for her baby's unexpected arrival. Her boyfriend, Dylan, had been supportive throughout her challenges. They had been together for a year, shared the same school, and made plans for their future. Although Dylan, also 16, seemed like an unlikely suspect, the police needed to be thorough in their investigation. They questioned him, verified his alibi, and searched for any reason someone might want to harm Chantel or her family. Dylan cooperated fully from the beginning. Heartbroken, he candidly expressed his love for Chantel, their hopes of raising their child together, and how the news of her murder had devastated him. He had a strong alibi, as he was celebrating his grandfather's anniversary in another city, with numerous witnesses to confirm his presence. With Dylan eliminated as a suspect, the investigation faced another frustrating standstill. However, the police had a significant asset: the killer's DNA. Forensic teams had gathered samples, including seminal fluid, which could lead directly to the murderer. Yet, when they checked it against the national database, they found no match, indicating that the perpetrator had no previous criminal history. Another important detail came to light: the murder weapon was one of the knives from the Rose kitchen. This indicated that the attack might not have been planned in advance, but rather a spontaneous act of violence. Additionally, the killer had taken the knives with him, removing a key piece of evidence. The estimated time of death was between midnight and 2 a.m. A neighbor later revealed they heard Rose scream for help around 1 a.m., followed by a loud thud, but assumed it was just a heated argument and did not call the police. With few clues and no obvious suspects, investigators reached out to the public for help, hoping to make progress. They received numerous tips, but most were misleading, consisting of wild theories, hoaxes, or leads that went nowhere. Just when it seemed like the investigation had stalled, Dylan remembered something important: the night before Chantel's murder, she had been unwell. She had a fever and had called her boss to inform them that she wouldn't be coming to work the next day. At precisely 5 a.m., Dylan texted her to check on how she was feeling. His message was read, but there was no response. Unbeknownst to him at the time, Chantel had already been dead for several hours, and it was someone else in the house who had read his message. The most frightening discovery followed. The killer had attempted to reply to Dylan's message, but since Chantel's phone had no credit, the message did not go through. This was a failed effort to make it look like she was still alive. With this unsettling clue, detectives began to investigate Chantel's social circle, looking for anyone who might hold a grudge. They soon encountered Jason Alexander Downey. Jason was part of the same school group as Dylan but hardly knew Chantel. He appeared innocent, of average height, thin, and quiet. Detectives started with the intention of asking Jason a few standard questions and moving on. However, as the interview progressed, his behavior became concerning. Instead of responding straightforwardly, he appeared nervous and avoided direct answers. Unexpectedly, he also claimed to have an alibi for the night of the murders, even though no one had inquired about it. The contradictions in his statements were quite troubling. Investigators collected fingerprints and DNA samples from Jason for comparison. He complied readily, showing an unusual calmness that momentarily led them to question their suspicions. However, they soon noticed several recent cuts on his palms. When asked about them, Jason attributed the injuries to an accident at a machine shop, but the wounds appeared too clean and precise, resembling injuries from gripping a knife. Forensic experts quickly found the answer. Jason's fingerprints matched those found on Chantel's bedroom door exactly. The belief that the murderer needed to be big and strong was incorrect. Jason, who was thin and seemed harmless, had overpowered 3 individuals in a sudden outburst of rage. Even more alarmingly, he deceived almost everyone around him. He even went to Chantel's memorial, laid down flowers, and pretended to mourn with her family and friends. Originally from Scotland, Jason had relocated to Kapunda with his mother and older brother. While his life appeared normal on the outside, there was a much darker side hidden beneath the surface. Chantel and Jason were never really close. She was polite to him, didn't dislike him, but she also didn't have any strong feelings for him. To her, he was just another member of the group. In contrast, Jason's feelings toward her were more intense. He had previously tried to show interest in Chantel, but she had rejected him. When he learned that Chantel was pregnant with Dylan's child, it triggered his jealousy. Jason's obsession had become overwhelming, and on the night of November 8th, his emotions hit a peak. When police first questioned Jason after his arrest, his unnerving calmness surprised the detectives. He denied any involvement, speaking with a disturbing confidence as if he could dismiss the growing evidence against him. He claimed that his fingerprints at the row home were from a visit several weeks prior, but that was not the only untruth. Forensic analysis showed that Jason's DNA was found on Chantel's body. When confronted with this evidence, he told an implausible story, insisting that he and Chantel had been intimate during his last visit. However, the science was clear: DNA cannot stay viable on a body for weeks. It had to be recent. During the interrogation, Jason eventually broke down and shared a troubling account of the events from that night. Earlier, he had a fierce argument with his mother and stepfather, which left him feeling frustrated and angry. As a result, he decided to sleep in his car. However, after learning from Dylan that Chantel was homesick and vulnerable, his feelings for her took a disturbing turn. What began as a simple plan to drive past her house turned into something much more alarming. He parked his car at the end of the street, out of sight, and approached her home. The house was dark and quiet, except for one bathroom window that was ajar. Being thin and agile, Jason managed to slip through the small opening easily. Once inside, he waited in the bathroom for nearly half an hour, listening to ensure that the house was completely silent. He later claimed his only purpose was to confess his feelings to Chantel, but this raises questions. If that were true, why did he bring a kitchen knife with him before entering her bedroom? The investigators quickly recognized that Jason was not being honest. He hadn't come to share his feelings, he wanted to manipulate Chantel. As soon as he entered her room, she sensed something was wrong. When she pushed back against him, it triggered his anger. In a blind rage, Jason grabbed a knife and attacked her, stabbing her multiple times. The noise alerted her parents, who rushed to help, but Jason, now completely engulfed in violence, turned the knife on them as well, brutally killing both. Later, Jason attempted to argue that his actions were a crime of passion, but the evidence pointed to something much more sinister: premeditation. As the police investigated further, they uncovered more incriminating evidence. They found a pair of bloodstained shoes left in a remote location. The DNA on them matched all 3 victims. The shoe prints also matched the bloody footprints at the crime scene. Additionally, Jason's sweat was discovered inside the shoes, adding to the evidence against him. Although he occasionally cooperated, offering to lead detectives to where he supposedly discarded the murder weapons, those weapons were never found. The police believed he was trying to manipulate the investigation and buy time, even as more evidence piled up against him. By the fall of 2011, almost a year after the murders, Jason Alexander Downey was on trial. Throughout the trial, he remained strangely emotionless, frequently changing his statements but never expressing genuine remorse. He claimed to have no memory of killing the Rowe family, even though there was strong forensic evidence proving his guilt. A particularly disturbing detail came to light during the trial. After the murders, Jason took Chantel's pendant and chain as a twisted trophy, serving as a grim reminder of the girl who had rejected him. Jason's intense feelings of rejection drove him to commit horrific acts. When he eventually pleaded guilty, it wasn't because he felt sorry, rather, it was a strategic choice to receive a lighter sentence. One investigator remarked, his guilty plea should not be interpreted as remorse. These murders were brutal, premeditated, and shocking beyond comprehension. On April 17, 2012, Jason Alexander Downey was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years. If he had not pleaded guilty, he would have had to serve at least 45 years before being eligible for parole. In a last attempt to manipulate the situation, Jason wrote a letter to Chantel's family and friends. In the letter, he expressed regret and claimed he deserved his punishment. However, the sincerity of his apology felt superficial and insincere, similar to a child being forced to say sorry instead of a man who genuinely regrets his actions. For Christopher Rowe, who lost his entire family in a single night, no sentence could ever replace what he has lost. To honor his loved ones, he decided to tattoo their names on his body, a lasting tribute to his parents and sister, who he will never see again. After the tragic event, Christopher stepped away from work to heal from painful memories. When he came back, he struggled to adjust to his previous life. Eventually, he took over his father's business. Emily Beatriz Azevedo Sena was born in Várzea Grande, a city in the Brazil state of Mato Grosso. She lived with her mother and her stepfather, who became a father figure to her when she was 6. He worked as a radiology technician at Santa Helena Hospital in the nearby city of Puyallup. The family lived a modest yet close-knit life. Emily was known for her kind nature, calm demeanor. Classmates and neighbors often described her as a gentle person who avoided conflict. At 16, Emily found out she was pregnant, a surprising discovery that she ultimately accepted. The father was a young partner of similar age. Instead of pulling away, he supported her throughout the situation. They started living together and he actively participated in getting ready for the baby's arrival. He went with Emily to doctor visits, assisted with planning, took part in conversations about names and baby items. Despite their youth, her partner demonstrated a strong sense of responsibility, dedication. Although their relationship encountered challenges because of their age, it was characterized as stable, supportive. For Emily, becoming pregnant was a major milestone in her life. She eagerly talked about her future daughter and shared her excitement with family, friends. Her mother and stepfather were very supportive, helping her choose furniture, buy clothes, prepare the nursery. Their home was filled with joy and anticipation. They celebrated the gender reveal twice, once with her partner's relatives and again with Emily's family. Friends remembered how glowing she looked when discussing her journey to motherhood. In another part of Mato Grosso, Natalie Helen Martins Pereira, a 25-year-old married to Christian Albino Cibalho de Arruda, 28, was raising their 3 children, a girl and 2 boys. Natalie worked in public safety, officially employed by the fire department while also taking nursing classes. To others, she seemed organized, responsible. However, beneath this surface, her life was more complicated. Several years ago, Natalie had a medical procedure that tied her fallopian tubes, which prevented her from becoming pregnant naturally. Despite this, she began claiming that she was expecting another child. To support her claims, Natalie created fake medical documents, including ultrasound images, and told others that she was having a baby girl. Christian believed her and shared the news on social media, posted the ultrasound images, even organized a gender reveal party. To make her story seem more convincing, Natalie often posted pictures of herself with what looked like a growing belly or loose clothing and explained her physical appearance as a sign of her impending delivery. In reality, this was all part of a carefully orchestrated and emotionally manipulative lie, a fake pregnancy that relied on fabricated evidence. Natalie not only staged a fake situation but also created an online identity. She joined various online groups for expecting mothers, where she pretended to be a helpful member who often offered items like baby clothes, diapers, and accessories to other moms-to-be. However, there was a catch: the items could only be picked up in person at her house, and the person collecting them had to come alone. This was a deliberate strategy where her online persona was used to make contacts and choose potential targets. No one in Natalie's close circle, neither Christian nor her family, realized that her cheerful demeanor was a meticulously crafted facade. She was intent on making her story a reality, regardless of the consequences. A few weeks before her disappearance, Emily started participating more often in online groups for expecting mothers. She shared her pregnancy thoughts, sought advice, and welcomed support. In one of these forums, she was approached by a user. Her messages were friendly. She offered to donate items for Emily's future daughter, such as clothes, baby blankets, and diapers. This seemed generous, and Emily was genuinely interested. Their conversation soon turned more personal. The user came across as warm and caring, emphasizing her desire to help. When Emily suggested bringing someone with her, like her partner or sister, Natalie became uneasy. She mentioned that her street had many nosy neighbors, and she wanted to avoid attracting any attention. Although her responses were unclear, they didn't raise any major red flags. Emily talked it over with her family and initially decided against going by herself. However, she changed her mind after Natalie offered to send a driver to pick her up, saying the car would be from a ride-sharing service like Uber. On March 12, 2024, around noon, a car came to pick up Emily. However, the driver, as later discovered by investigators, was not affiliated with any ride-sharing service. It was believed that he was either a relative or a friend of Natalie. The car was an ordinary civilian vehicle. Unaware of any potential danger, Emily got in after telling her mother that she would be back soon. She thought the outing would be just a quick trip to collect some donated items before returning home. After more than an hour without any updates from Emily, her mother, Ana Paula Meridian, started to feel anxious. Soon, messages began to come from Emily's phone. However, instead of soothing her worries, the texts only increased her anxiety. Emily claimed she was fine, enjoying a pastry, and would be back soon. Yet, something felt wrong. The language used was strange, overly formal, and didn't match Emily's usual way of writing. Ana quickly realized that someone else must have sent the messages. She attempted to call Emily, but there was no response, and her voice messages went unheard. As her concern grew, the family reached out to friends and acquaintances in hopes of finding Emily. Emily's stepfather was working at the hospital that day. He sensed something was wrong. He knew Emily had intended to pick up some items, and her failure to answer calls made him even more anxious. That evening, the family quickly decided to file a missing person report. At that time, no one knew where Emily was, who the driver was, or where she was headed. The only clue the family had was an online conversation with someone the woman, who mentioned living in the Jardim Florianopolis neighborhood in Puyallup. This clue marked the beginning of a search by family members and friends. Worried and desperate, they knocked on doors in the neighborhood, checked the streets, and attempted to call the number mentioned in the messages, but no one answered. Communication had completely stopped. Emily's phone was still on, but she wasn't answering. Then, Natalie suddenly changed her online behavior. She stopped replying to chat group messages and withdrew her support for others. Later, it was revealed that shortly after Emily left home, Natalie deleted all her messages and her account. This disappearance from the online world only confirmed the family's deepest fears. This was not a chance occurrence. By the evening of March 12th, the search for Emily was in full swing. Her family had reached out to the local police, shared her photos on social media, and appealed to the public for assistance. The initial hours after her disappearance were filled with urgency and anxiety, but no one anticipated how drastically the situation would develop. The following morning, March 13, 2024, a woman arrived at the emergency room of Santa Helena Hospital in Puyallup with a newborn. She was in a wheelchair and told the hospital staff that she had given birth at home the day before. She described the labor as quick and straightforward, so she hadn't felt the need for medical help at that time. Now, she said, she was just there for a post-delivery checkup. The woman introduced herself as Natalie. That morning, the hospital staff member on duty was Emily's stepfather, a radiology technician. Although he did not know Natalie personally, he immediately sensed that something was wrong when he saw her. The previous evening, Emily had gone missing, and one of the primary theories suggested it was linked to a conversation she had with an online stranger who was offering baby items. Emily had previously mentioned to both her mother and her stepfather that she met someone online. She even shared a photo of her from the messaging app. Emily's stepfather immediately recognized the woman in the photo as the same person Emily had been talking to before she disappeared. Natalie was holding a newborn baby that the doctors believed had just been born. However, something seemed unusual. Her behavior and physical state did not align with what one would expect from someone who had recently given birth. There were no visible signs of pain, post-labor symptoms, bleeding, or trauma. Medical staff also found that she was not producing milk when she tried to breastfeed. Even the way she stood and moved raised concerns. Even though she arrived in a wheelchair, she moved around confidently and chose to sit in a chair rather than needing to. A preliminary medical evaluation raised concerns. There were no signs that she had recently given birth. Her cervix was not dilated, and her uterus was of normal size, showing no changes or discharges that usually occur after delivery. This became crucial evidence that proved her story was false. The medical staff quickly informed hospital administrators and contacted local authorities about the situation. Emily's stepfather told investigators that Emily had gone missing the day before after planning to meet a woman. When he recognized the woman in front of him matched Emily's description and photo, his concerns grew. When officers arrived at the hospital, Natalie claimed that the newborn girl was her daughter, whom she had given birth to at home. She could not provide any documentation to support her claim, saying the birth was unexpected and there was no time to go to a medical facility. She answered questions calmly and showed no signs of distress. Investigators started looking into the origin of the newborn. They ordered emergency blood tests and DNA analysis. Medical professionals confirmed that the baby had been born within the last 24 hours, which matched the timeline of Emily's disappearance. This led to a troubling question: could this child be Emily's daughter? Investigators examined Natalie's phone and found deleted conversations, including exchanges with Emily. These messages showed that Emily had agreed to meet Natalie to receive baby items. This evidence indicated a clear pattern of deception. Natalie had created a false identity, gained trust, and arranged a meeting under false pretenses. At this point, the idea that Natalie had simply gone to the hospital for a checkup was no longer believable. Law enforcement began to suspect that Natalie may have brought a baby that she did not give birth to, but rather one that was taken from someone else. Their suspicions were confirmed when they analyzed ultrasound images that Natalie had shared on social media. Investigators discovered that these images did not belong to her. They were taken from another woman's profile, a woman living in a different state, who had no known connection to Natalie. As these discrepancies emerged, the police shifted their focus to finding Emily. The infant Natalie had brought to the hospital was placed in temporary protective custody under the care of social services until her biological identity could be verified. Shortly after, Natalie was taken to the police station for formal questioning. At first, she remained silent. When directly asked about the child's origin, she gave vague answers, claiming that everything had been explained and that nothing wrong had occurred. Although she appeared calm and showed no signs of panic, her reluctance to provide a clear explanation led investigators to suspect that she was stalling. Only after investigators showed her the medical exam results, which disproved her claim of giving birth, along with the recovered text messages linking her to Emily, did Natalie change her story. She then shared her initial account of events. She claimed to have met Emily in online parenting groups and said that Emily was struggling in her relationship. Emily had thought about not keeping the baby. Natalie asserted that she offered to take care of the child and that Emily had agreed. However, law enforcement had doubts about this explanation. Emily's family strongly denied any claims that she intended to give up her daughter. They insisted that Emily had been excited about her baby's arrival and never showed any doubts about keeping her. The whole family actively prepared for the new baby by buying clothes, setting up a nursery, and celebrating together. Emily's mother and stepfather emphasized that she viewed her future daughter as the most important part of her life, and the thought of giving the baby away was entirely unthinkable for her. This information was part of the official case file, and Natalie's statements were now being examined for inconsistencies. When faced with increasing evidence, Natalie eventually changed her story. In a second interview with investigators, she confessed that she had tricked Emily into coming to a house by pretending to offer baby items. Emily arrived alone, as they had agreed in their online communication. Emily then began to feel pain and sat down, complaining of cramps. At that moment, Natalie approached her from behind and forcefully restrained her. After Emily lost consciousness, Natalie bound her wrists and ankles with materials she had available. She then tried to deliver the baby by making an incision in Emily's abdomen with a sharp kitchen tool. Emily received no medical assistance and ultimately died due to severe blood loss. Natalie did not express any regret in her statement. She claimed that she wanted to take care of the baby and did not mean to cause any harm. However, the way she acted, using restraints and preparing certain materials, suggested that her actions were thought out beforehand. As Natalie continued to speak, her versions of events became more inconsistent with the facts. Investigators ultimately determined that the incident was pre-planned. After questioning Natalie, law enforcement started investigating all places associated with her. One property in the Jardim Florianopolis area received special attention. This private residence, owned by Natalie's brother, was said to be where she met Emily. During the property inspection, police noticed an area behind the house where the ground looked recently disturbed. The soil was uneven. They quickly cordoned off the area and called in forensic specialists. As the specialists carefully removed the top layer of soil, they discovered that a body had been buried. Emily's body was found in a shallow grave, covered loosely with dirt and debris. The way the body was positioned indicated it had been disposed of hurriedly. Her wrists and ankles showed signs of restraints, including ropes and bits of plastic cable. Investigators later determined that the bindings were made from old internet wiring. The grave itself was poorly dug, without the use of tools, and was barely big enough to hold the body. Emily's body displayed clear signs of trauma on her body. Her face had visible injuries, including bruises, swelling, and scratches. Forensic experts noted damage to her cheekbones and nose. There were also marks on her neck that suggested she had been choked, as well as bruises on her wrists indicating she had been forcefully held down. The autopsy revealed that these injuries occurred while she was alive, implying the use of significant force. It was determined that her death resulted from severe blood loss due to a deep wound in her abdomen. The precise T-shaped incision in her lower abdomen indicated that it was not an accident. Forensic experts indicated that the shape and depth of the cut suggested the perpetrator had a basic understanding of internal anatomy and made an effort to avoid injuring the baby. This degree of knowledge is rare for someone without medical training, although it could be obtained by watching detailed instructional videos. This was further confirmed by analyzing Natalie's internet search history. A key finding was that the burial site had been prepped in advance. Initially, Natalie claimed she dug the grave after the incident, but she later changed her story, admitting it was prepared the day before the meeting. A forensic team carefully examined the scene. Using chemical tests, they discovered important traces of biological material both inside the house and throughout the property. Blood stains were present in multiple rooms. Although some parts of the floor had been cleaned, residues were still left in the tile grout and seams. These findings were meticulously recorded and included in the criminal case. Given the amount of evidence, authorities officially reclassified the case as a premeditated crime with aggravating factors. Immediately after her arrest, Natalie stated that she acted alone and that her husband, relatives, anyone else were unaware of her plans. At that time, the house was occupied by her brother and his wife. Natalie stated that her brother and his wife were not home when the crime happened, but investigators could not confirm this. Their exact whereabouts during that time remained uncertain. A significant question was whether they could genuinely be unaware of a freshly dug pit on the property or that someone had come in to help clean the house. However, it was later established that Natalie had been to the house several times leading up to the incident, under the pretense of helping with chores or spending the weekend. This made her visits seem normal and unremarkable to those living there. Forensic experts noted that it would be very challenging for a single person to dig a pit, commit an act of violence, perform a makeshift procedure, move a body, clean the crime scene, hide evidence, and leave the area without drawing attention, all within a short period. This is especially true given the logistical difficulties involved. The body was wrapped in fabric and required various materials, while the cleaning process included removing items, white blood, and washing clothing. Each of these tasks demanded time, strength, and coordination. Did Natalie truly act alone? At the time of the investigation, there were increasing suspicions, but no solid evidence was found linking anyone else to the case. No family member had been officially identified as an accomplice. Cayo Police Chief Fernando Alvarez Albuquerque said authorities are continuing to investigate whether Natalie's husband, brother, and the driver had anything to do with the death and burial. After the body was officially identified and all forensic procedures were completed, Emily's family received permission for a burial. Because of the condition of the remains, the service was conducted quickly. The ceremony was brief and did not include a traditional farewell. It was held privately, attended only by immediate family members, Emily's mother, stepfather, the young father of the baby, and a few other relatives. The family was devastated by the loss. They were deeply affected emotionally and unable to speak publicly about their grief. Emily's mother, as reported by those close to her, was in a fragile emotional state and had withdrawn from social interactions, avoiding even her neighbors. Emily's partner, who never expected to become a father under such tragic circumstances. According to the family, he has remained dedicated. He frequently visits the baby. Despite his young age, he has shown a desire to be actively involved in raising his daughter. The newborn, who was rescued after the incident, has been placed temporarily in the care of her grandmother, Emily's mother, a decision made by child welfare authorities and the district attorney's office. Emily's stepfather is also considered one of the responsible guardians. During the first few weeks, medical professionals monitored the baby's condition closely. Fortunately, she stayed in stable health. After receiving medical clearance, the baby was taken home to the same place where her mother had lived. The reason for Natalie's actions remained a key topic of conversation. Even though she was already a mother of 3, she pretended to be pregnant for almost 9 months, creating an illusion of expecting another child. She went to great lengths to forge medical records and create a believable story online, portraying herself as an expectant parent on social media. However, her goal was not just to have another baby, she specifically sought out expecting mothers who were likely to have daughters. Her method of selecting targets, arranging the setting, and researching how to remove and take baby indicated that her actions were carefully planned. Natalie is still in custody, waiting for her trial. The charges against her are still active, and investigators believe the evidence supporting these charges is strong. Emily's case has gained significant attention and raised serious concerns, influencing how online interactions are perceived, particularly among vulnerable groups. Valentine's Day is typically about celebrating love, but for Susan Hamilton, it took a dark turn. As she prepared to leave her house, her hair still wet and fully dressed, everything seemed normal. However, soon after, her husband, Dr. John Hamilton, frantically called 911. When the police arrived, they discovered a shocking scene. As the investigation progressed, inconsistencies in John's account began to surface. Was this attack random, or was it connected to their home life? In Oklahoma City, a love story unfolded that would eventually surprise the entire community. It all began in 1985 when Susan, a devoted single mother and Christian nurse, met Dr. John Hamilton, a well-respected obstetrician and gynecologist. John, a devoted father, instantly felt a strong connection to Susan's kindness. Susan, in turn, appreciated John's supportive nature. 2 years later, they married in 1987, creating what many viewed as an ideal life together. They settled into a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood, a testament to the success of John's thriving medical practice. Susan chose to leave her nursing job to focus on their marriage and community involvement, quickly becoming a respected figure in both their church and local community. John and Susan Hamilton appeared to live a perfect life. Their relationship seemed filled with joy. They often enjoyed luxurious vacations and romantic outings together. John was particularly generous, showering Susan with expensive gifts like jewelry, luxury cars, including a Porsche, and designer items that highlighted both their wealth. He was attentive and caring, always striving to make Susan feel cherished. Susan, in turn, loved him just as much. Their marriage lasted over 15 years, during which they experienced both shared achievements and private struggles. Despite not having children together, John had a family from an earlier relationship. They remained committed to one another. However, beneath this seemingly perfect life, issues began to arise. What looked like a fairy tale was soon to take a dark and tragic turn. As time went on, John became a key figure in the termination of pregnancy. In addition to delivering babies and addressing women's health issues, he also performed termination of pregnancy at his clinic. This aspect of his work not only faced moral opposition but also posed personal risks. Activists often gathered outside his clinic, holding signs, handing out provocative flyers, spreading his name and photo in attempts to shame or intimidate him. The harassment extended beyond the clinic. It reached his home as well. His wife, Susan, started receiving threatening phone calls. Some of these messages were so alarming that she feared for her safety. Despite living under this shadow of fear, the Hamiltons focused on maintaining their public image. They hosted fancy gatherings, stayed involved in community activities, and appeared to live an enviable life. John consistently showed love and affection for Susan, making every Valentine's Day a special occasion. They followed their cherished tradition of exchanging heartfelt cards and small gifts, keeping the romance alive throughout the years. On the morning of February 14, 2001, John started his day by leaving for work around 7 a.m. to perform surgery at the hospital. He arrived in regular clothes and changed into scrubs. After completing the first procedure at 8:40 a.m., he returned home briefly. John stated that he left a bouquet of flowers and a Valentine's card for Susan before heading back for his second surgery. He mentioned that she was not home at that time. When he returned later that morning, everything had changed. John sensed that something was wrong. The door was slightly open, which was unusual. Inside, the house felt eerily quiet. As he moved through the rooms, he was unprepared for what he found next. In the bathroom, Susan lay on the floor, covered in blood. Her injuries were shocking. She had been strangled with 2 neckties, and her skull had been so severely crushed that brain matter was visible. The murder weapon was never found. In a state of desperation, John called 911, his voice shaking as he pleaded for assistance. He was explaining that he had attempted CPR but was unable to revive her. Emergency responders arrived within minutes to a horrifying scene. Blood was splattered everywhere, indicating a violent struggle. This wasn't just a murder, it seemed excessively brutal. The level of violence suggested that whoever did this must have had deep personal animosity towards Susan. But who could act like that about a woman so loved by everyone? Officers quickly noticed some troubling details at the scene. Both of Hamilton's cars were parked in the driveway. Inside the house, John's shirt and shoes were covered in blood. There were also blood traces in his car. Investigators found the inconsistencies and the signs of extreme violence hard to overlook. Initially, the situation didn't add up. John and Susan appeared to be the perfect couple, loving, successful. Their life resembled a picture from a magazine. However, the reality was much more sinister than anyone had anticipated. By that day, it would no longer represent love. Instead, it would mark the start of a startling investigation that shattered the community's perception of John and Susan Hamilton. Suspicion quickly turned to her husband, Dr. John Hamilton, as he was the last person known to have seen her alive and was the one who found her body. That evening, the police arrested him. From the start, John's behavior was questionable. During the interrogation, he seemed very upset, his hands trembled, he couldn't remain still, and at times he appeared inconsolable. Some believed he was simply overcome with grief, while others thought his reactions seemed staged. His inconsistent behavior made it hard to distinguish between true sorrow and possible guilt. Even though the front door was left open, unusual for their wealthy neighborhood, nothing valuable had been stolen. The house, filled with luxury items like expensive jewelry, electronics, and fine art, remained untouched. Investigators quickly dismissed the idea of robbery. There were no indications of forced entry. However, a small marble figurine was missing from the bathroom. Detectives believed it could have been used to harm Susan, but the figurine was never located. Investigators explored various options due to the lack of a clear motive or external suspects. One theory was that the murder might have been politically motivated. Due to his job, John faced threats and protests. The couple became openly targeted. However, there was no concrete evidence connecting the crime to any of the protesters. No eyewitnesses, no signs of forced entry, and no leads to follow. The key discovery was surprisingly personal, a Valentine's Day card. While searching the Hamilton home, police found a card that Susan had written for John. What seemed like a straightforward love note became significant for investigators. The message said, "I obviously bought this before last Monday, so I guess it doesn't seem appropriate now. I still love you, though. Have a good day, Susan." This raised concerns for detectives. What events occurred the previous Monday? Why did she feel the card was no longer suitable? Questions began to arise. The card's tone, which felt conflicted and detached, sharply contrasted with the loving image they showed to others. Soon, rumors of a hidden truth started to emerge. One of Susan's closest friends informed the police that she suspected John was having an affair. This revelation shattered the image of the devoted husband and revealed something much darker. Susan had confided to her daughter that she felt trapped in her marriage. She described her relationship as one-sided, where everything centered around John. He demanded her attention, ignored her feelings, and made her feel invisible. She even admitted to considering leaving him. The seemingly perfect marriage that the public admired was turning out to be a fragile facade. Detectives investigated further, revealing a more concerning situation. Susan found phone records indicating over 60 calls to the same woman, a stripper from a local club. She printed the records and confronted John, who denied any wrongdoing, claiming the woman was simply a hospital patient. However, Susan was skeptical. She confided in a friend about the confrontation and mentioned she was considering divorce, which may have been the breaking point. As the investigation progressed, it became evident that Susan was getting ready to leave a marriage that no longer fulfilled her. John faced the possibility of losing not only his wife but also his reputation, lifestyle, and perhaps his career. By February 14th, the Valentine's Day traditions that once represented lasting love now hid the painful reality of a crumbling relationship. What used to feel like genuine affection, flowers, a card, might have actually been a frantic attempt to salvage something that had already fallen apart behind their lavish facade. The extravagant gifts and polished public image masked a brewing storm. When it finally erupted, it resulted in a chaotic and deeply personal situation that could no longer be overlooked. As the investigation into Susan Hamilton's brutal murder progressed, a more troubling picture of John Hamilton emerged. Behind his polished image and respected career was a man who desperately wanted to protect his reputation. A pending divorce and a public affair threatened to ruin everything he had built. Initially, John denied any romantic relationship with the woman Susan suspected, insisting she was just a patient. However, the truth eventually surfaced. Investigators found that he had been frequently visiting her at the strip club where she worked, and she had given him private dances. Despite the growing evidence, John maintained that nothing physical had happened between them, but this defense seemed weak. One important detail emerged: John had written a letter to the woman, saying he could no longer be her doctor. While it might seem like he was ending their relationship, it raised questions. Was he trying to regain Susan's trust, or was he manipulating the situation to postpone a divorce? To the police, it appeared to be an attempt at damage control. The media found the story intriguing and became heavily involved, sensing there was more beneath the surface. One local news station even sent the 911 call John made to a voice stress analyst. The results were surprising. The analysis showed his voice had very little stress, uncharacteristic for someone who had just found his wife's mutilated body. This indicated that he wasn't panicked or heartbroken, but rather calm and in control, as if he had rehearsed what to say. The inconsistencies continued to unfold. John told emergency responders that he tried to perform CPR, but investigators were doubtful. They noticed there was no blood on his mouth or face. Given the severity of Susan's head injuries, if he had genuinely attempted to resuscitate her, he would likely have been covered in blood. Instead, evidence indicated otherwise. Forensic analysis showed that the blood found on John's shirt and shoes belonged to Susan. Even more incriminating was the discovery of her blood and tissue inside his car, which was much more than initially thought. John claimed he moved his car to give paramedics space, but this explanation fell apart when examined closely. The presence of tissue fragments suggested that Susan had been in the car after she was injured or that John had moved evidence after the murder. The blood pattern found on John's clothing did not support his account of the events. Instead of suggesting he was an innocent bystander trying to help, the evidence indicated he was directly involved in the violence. The investigators' theory was disturbing. In a fit of rage or desperation, John tried to strangle Susan with his ties. When she fought back, he became more violent. He hit her in the head with a blunt object, possibly the missing marble figurine. After she fell, he violently crushed her skull. This was not a random act or a robbery, it was a personal and brutal murder driven by overwhelming anger. Evidence against John was piling up: the affair, blood evidence, stress analysis, the missing figurine, and a motive rooted in ego, pride, and a fear of shame. Their marriage had been troubled long before that tragic day. On the morning of the murder, John returned home after his first surgery, not just to drop off flowers and a Valentine's card as he had claimed, but to confront Susan. The argument that ensued would end their marriage in a horrific way. The timeline shows that Susan was getting ready to leave for a 9:30 a.m. appointment with a friend. She was found not to be wearing clothes, with damp hair. Detectives found an important detail in John's hospital schedule: his second surgery was supposed to start at 9 a.m., but he didn't arrive until 9:38. The staff had even sent someone to search for him because of his delay. During those 30 unexplained minutes, John had the opportunity to commit the murder. He thought he would have more time to clean up, but a sudden call back to the hospital interrupted him. In a panic, he changed out of his blood-stained clothes and returned to work just in time for surgery, appearing calm, focused, and professional as if nothing had happened. Hours later, when he called 911, he acted devastated. However, for investigators, the truth was already starting to come out. The close distance of their home to the hospital was crucial to the case, showing that John could have committed the crime and still returned in time for surgery. More importantly, it ruled out the possibility that someone else had entered the house in the brief window between John's departure and Susan's planned outing. There simply wasn't enough time for another person to commit the crime without being noticed. During the trial preparations, John's defense team decided to hire a blood spatter expert to evaluate the evidence. However, this decision proved to be detrimental for John's case. While testifying, the expert was asked if the prosecution had missed anything important, and he revealed a shocking finding. He had identified blood stains on the inside sleeve of John's shirt that matched patterns consistent with blunt force trauma. Although he was brought in to support the defense, the expert could not ignore the facts. His analysis confirmed the prosecution's suspicions. The blood must have been there at the exact moment Susan was attacked. This revelation dealt a devastating blow to John Hamilton's defense. In the courtroom, the evidence revealed a disturbing story of deliberate anger. The reasons behind John's actions were evident. The jury acted quickly. John Hamilton was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. He was also required to pay over $11,000 for his incarceration expenses. John is currently incarcerated at the Dick Connor Correctional Center in Hominy, Oklahoma. This case was unprecedented in the county and had a significant impact. John has submitted several appeals, all of which have been rejected. He has consistently claimed that he did not commit the murder. Even now, he insists on his innocence, and a dedicated group of supporters believes he was wrongly convicted. However, the question persists: was justice achieved, or is there more to this story than people understand? Did John Hamilton deserve a life sentence, or was this situation based on circumstantial evidence that was misinterpreted?